Good afternoon. I want to welcome you back to the conference, the Schiller Institute International Conference on the Age of Reason, or the Annihilation of Humanity. This is panel 2, The Name of Peace, a New Security and Economic Development Architecture. My name is Dennis Small of the Schiller Institute and EIR magazine, and I'll be moderating this session. The central issue of global security revolves around the development of the so-called Global South. A new security architecture and the new development architecture are not two separate issues. They're two different ways of looking at the same policy matter. Lyndon LaRouche expressed it this way in his 1984 draft memorandum of agreement between the United States and the USSR. And I quote, "The political foundation for durable peace must be, number one, the unconditional sovereignty of each and all nation states, and, number two, cooperation among sovereign nation states to the effect of promoting unlimited opportunities to participate in the benefits of technological progress to the mutual benefit of each and all. The most crucial feature of present implementation of such a policy of durable peace is a profound change in the monetary, economic, and political relations between the dominant powers and those relatively subordinated nations, often classed as developing nations." Close quote. How then do we achieve such development? How do we structure a new order based on what philosophical outlook, and above all, on what concept of the nature of man? That is our agenda this afternoon. And to do that, we will be entering into dialogue with distinguished representatives of nations in Africa, Asia, and Ibero-America in particular, precisely those developing nations that Mr. LaRouche was referring to. Late last year, Helga Zepp-LaRouche put a proposal on the table for 10 principles to underline that new paradigm, which you heard about earlier today and which will also be taken up in today's discussion, including a celebration of the power of the creative human spirit through the music of a number of world cultures at the end of this panel. These issues have been put up front and center on the world stage by the announced intended expansion of the BRICS to the BRICS Plus, as you can see on the world map, which is now on your screen. The sanctions imposed on Russia and other nations have made this an urgent matter of life and death for the majority of the planet, as many nations are now actively considering what steps need to be taken to put the predatory City of London and Wall Street financial system through bankruptcy reorganization, as Lyndon LaRouche long demanded, and are asking what role China and the Belt and Road Initiative in particular will play in the new paradigm. Can such a group of nations make it if they break from London and Wall Street? The answer is a matter of physical economy and classical culture. We turn first to Lyndon LaRouche, the foremost economist and statesman of this era. Extraordinarily prolific writer and speaker, he developed an entire corpus of works which are in the process of being made available to the public by the LaRouche Legacy Foundation. And it can accurately be said that that corpus of works is 100 miles wide and 500 miles deep. LaRouche spoke in a September 4th, 2004 keynote to the Schiller Institute International Conference and gave a presentation called A Moment of Epic Decision. Let's listen to what Mr. LaRouche had to say.
We are bankrupt. The same thing is true in Europe. There is not a nation in Europe, not a single one, on the European continent, which is not bankrupt. On top of that, the entire world monetary financial system is bankrupt. That is the collapse of wealth, physical wealth. Collapse of production in real terms has been accelerating downward. You see it around you. You see it wherever you go. But the spiral of monetary and financial aggregate zooms upwards, skyrockets. We're in the greatest inflation in modern history. and the amount of debt outstanding is such that this can never be repaid. We've reached a boundary condition, a limit. This system is now going to collapse. It may collapse tomorrow morning, not because of what I say today, but it may collapse in a week, may collapse in 2 months, it may wait till the end of the year. I doubt it will make it that far. Its legs are giving out. We will then be hit with the awareness of something far worse than the Depression of 1929. We will be hit by conditions, murderous conditions, far beyond those that our people suffered increasingly over the period 1929 into the time of the inauguration of President Roosevelt. This is the harsh reality now. Anyone who tells you there's a prospect of recovery is a liar or a fool. Think about what the difference is between man and an animal. No animal could discover and apply a universal physical principle. Only the human mind can do that. All the so-called physical principles of that nature, the principles of classical artistic composition, are of the same nature as science. No animal is capable of classical artistic composition, though some human beings try to be animals when they do it, and the results are not very satisfying. So therefore, because we are immortal, as we shall emphasize in various points here in this proceedings these 3 days, when we develop an idea, or when we receive the ability to recreate that idea of principle within ourselves, we are expressing a relationship, an immortal relationship between those who lived before us and ourselves. When we talk about the discoveries of Archimedes, when we relive the act of those discoveries, we recreate the living Archimedes in our own mind. And Archimedes lives as an efficient part of society today. This is true of all great discoveries. The progress of man from the few million individuals which a higher ape species could attain to 6 billion or more today is entirely the result of immortality, the ability of a human individual to receive, generate, and transmit discoveries of universal principle from one generation and person to the next. That other people live within us. Those of us who know anything about life know of the other people who live within us, who are now dead, but they live within us because something of themselves, which has a creative impact, lives within us. It strengthens us if we use it. It gives us the power to improve society. That is how society has progressed. That is why you must be optimistic about the native goodness of the human individual. There are no human individuals who are born bad. Every human individual has the creative power which defines each human person as in the image of the Creator. We are the only creature who can discover the principles of creation of the Creator, can adopt them, can use them, and can increase man's power over the universe by using those creative principles which the Creator has provided, but only we as human beings can access. And when we participate in the Creator in that way, by devoting our lives to that side of our life, which is truly human, we become consciously, really, and powerfully human. This is the power which was shown by Jeanne d'Arc in making possible the establishment of the first modern nation state in human existence. This was the same quality of creative passion which Martin Luther King showed, especially on the eve of his death, on the night before he was murdered.
You were listening to remarks that were made by Lyndon LaRouche on September 4th, 2004, in his keynote address to a Schiller Institute conference, A Moment of Epic Decision. Words that are as applicable and germane today as they were back then, almost 20 years ago. To embark us on today's journey of dialogue and deliberation, we turn to Jacques Cheminade to make the first presentation. Jacques is from France. He is the president of Solidarité et Progrès party. He is a former presidential candidate, and he is the longtime leader of the LaRouche movement in France and internationally. He will lead off our discussion this afternoon with a presentation on LaRouche's design for the new paradigm. Jacques, the floor is yours.
All my best to all of you committed to peace, wherever you are. As opposed to us, our present Western leaders are waving the banner of war. They have written the name of war on their banner. War. If they don't quite measure its consequences, it is no excuse, because like the hateful Pied Piper of Hamelin, their barbaric music is threatening to throw us all from the top of the cliff into nuclear annihilation. War. They have expressed many times their intention. They are not hiding it. Here I am only going to mention Admiral Robert Bauer, chair of the NATO Military Committee since June 2021. We are ready for a direct confrontation with Russia. This is not merely the babbling of Annalena Baerbock, apparently serving as Germany Minister of Foreign Affairs, also since 2021, or of France's dumb Economic Minister Bruno Le Maire. It is the rules-based mental disorder of the five-eyes monster of the global NATO oligarchy. It means a war economy, prioritization of certain raw materials, and production facilities required for defense production instead of civilian production. Let's face it, the true name is a culture of death, as once Pope John Paul II characterized it as a directionality, then, now becoming reality. This is what we have to confront on why this panel is titled The Name of Peace, a New Security and Economic Development Architecture. We come from various parts of the world and various institutions committed not only to stop the war, but to build the architecture of peace based on principles to eradicate the roots of war. Helga Zepp-LaRouche has presented the work of her whole life, condensed in 10 principles to awake all of us from the sleep of reason that breeds the present monsters. We should reflect on the coherence of those principles and act according to them, because in this present historical moment, if we abstain from acting, we become the collaborators of evil, as Martin Niemöller warned us in his poem When They Came to For Me. In the war taking place in Eastern Europe, the Ukrainians are being slaughtered. The NATO member countries have betrayed their pledges met after the fall of the Berlin Wall not to expand their presence to the borders of Russia. Angela Merkel, François Hollande, and Petro Poroshenko have betrayed the Minsk agreements. Let the Ukrainian regimes bombard the Donbass and purposely organize the militarization of Ukraine under Anglo-American guardianship. Then Putin has no other strategy choice than to intervene. With a similar consent to fatality as their so-called European predecessors in the summer of 1914, today's powers walk into war like somnambulists. This has to be stopped immediately through diplomacy as opposed to the sending of more and more lethal weapons. It is a right commitment to take, but within the framework of a narrow view, a fallacy of composition in a way. We should address a larger picture, an international financial and military oligarchy, what our friend Ray McGovern characterizes as a Mickey Mouse, the military-industrial complex denounced by Dwight Eisenhower in 1961, has mutated since then into a warmongering blob, a slime mold that governs not only the United States, but the whole West. It is something intrinsically committed to war. It is something committed to war as such. A revealing fact is the name of the room where diplomats from all countries of the European Union are presently trained to forget about their national roots, in the city of Bruges, Belgium. The name given to that room is Madeleine Albright, the woman who told journalists that the death of 500,000 innocent young Iraqis has been the price to be paid for a necessary and just war. The overall picture, since at least the colonial wars of the United Kingdom and France and the Vietnam War of the United States, is that of a trail of blood. From Africa to Latin America to Yemen to Syria to Libya to Afghanistan, leading to our historical moment now. The oligarchical beast devours its own children. More than 40% of all children of single parents are living in poverty in Germany, and more than 7 million French citizens are the equivalent of food stamps, about 20 million including their families. Worse, acknowledging that their world motion goes towards war, a recent RAND Corporation that Helga LaRouche referred in the last panel, a recent RAND Corporation study basically says that to have a long war against Russia is not the best idea for the United States because the real war is going to be against China. To get rid of all that manure, once and for all, is what defines our challenge. For us, in the belly of a Mickey Mouse. For us, armed with our proposal for a new global security and development architecture based on the 10 principles of Helga LaRouche. Lyndon LaRouche foresaw the necessity for such a change of the tide that he developed in a laser form in his writings of 2005, Earth Next 50 Years. He urged us to go beyond Westphalia now. I quote him, "As I have argued on earlier occasions, the world as a whole has reached a point of development at which the assured continuation of civilized life on this planet requires us to reject the follies of experiments in so-called globalization in favor of a system of respectively sovereign nation-states which would have established a form of planetary system of cooperation. This would be the establishment of a form which is more fairly described as a realization of the same aims and principles which were implicit in that 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. In general, that means establishing a new monetary system under the renewed principle of the Treaty of Westphalia as applied to these present circumstances and their challenges. It requires little more than a fair estimate of the situation to suggest that in taking such steps for progress under conditions of the general ongoing breakdown crisis of the world's present self-doomed monetary financial system, we must recognize that we are embarked on the implied measures of general reorganization of the world, a reorganization whose initial phase will not be less than 2 generations, which is, so to say, in terms of requirements of modern society and its technology, 2 generations aggregating to about 50 years. The great and crucial portion of the new capital formation in basic economic infrastructure will be as international capital associated with long-term treaty agreements among sovereign nation states. The term of the bulk of this new capital will span a quarter to a half century, as the case of Europe's participation in the development of China assets. This gives a powerful new depth of meaning to the principle of advantage to the other of the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. This issue, stresses LaRouche in the introduction of his book, is human creativity. This is how he defines it. The term creativity appears in European economic thought as a Promethean principle, the discovery and knowledge of the use of universal physical principles by man to the effect of increasing mankind's potential relative population density and per capita net physical output per square kilometers of land area. Of course, to gather enough forces to lead our fight for peace, we cannot expect that all fighters reach that level of understanding. The point is that by starting to fight for the good cause, knowing that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul, like Helga de LaRouche says in her 10th principle. Hope, then, brings the capacity to accomplish miracles in a mass-strike ferment, as it is now emerging. In France, we have workers in general, old trade unionists, experienced trade unionists, demonstrating for their pensions and for peace at the same time. They know that the two are a single unit. A majority of retired generals and colonels, disgusted with the butchery threatening Europe, and disgusted with the transformation of NATO into an offensive alliance. Bakers, shop owners, craftsmen, angry against the arrogance of the government and ruling oligarchy. A good and promising people's bloc, as I called it here, people's unit. A coincidence of the opposites that our mission is to unite and educate in higher and higher forms of commitment for the future of our nation and humanity through the process of mobilization. They understand that we are in an epochal change and ask us for references from what is the new Silk Road of China exactly, to what's happening in Latin America, to why is it that Russia is not collapsing and Western Europe instead underdeveloping. We are at this moment of history where the necessary change becomes possible. Let me end with a poem of Victor Hugo, written as a reflection of his intervention at the World Peace Congress of 1849, where he had called at that Congress for the emerging universal fraternity of all men to clear the world, colonize the deserts, improve creation. The title of the poem is Sound Forever, Clarions of Thought. It is a history of Joshua marching around Jericho. I read the poem. When Joshua gains the high-walled city fort, he marched around it with his banner high, his troops in serried order following nigh. But not a sword was drawn, no shaft outsprang, only the trumpets, the shrill onset rang. At the first blast, smiled scornfully the king, and at the second sneered, half wondering, hope thou with noise my stronghold to break down? Then come the next apparently unsuccessful rounds that I quote now, that I don't quote now, and I go to the end of the poem. It follows. At the sixth time, upon a tower's tall crest, so high that the eagle built his nest, so had that on it lightning hit in vain, appeared in merriment the king again. These Hebrew Jews musicians are great, meseems, He scoffed, "Lord laughing, but they live on dreams." The princes laughed, submissive to the king, and then the laughter spread through all the town. At the seventh blast, the city walls fell down. Les murailles tombèrent. Our political music plays the beautiful score of the miracle that has to be next, provided that we spread the tenacious spirit of Joshua, even if our translation happens sometimes to be imperfect. Thank you.
For the universal translation of exactly these ideas of living on dreams and the clear sound of the trumpet, you will definitely want to stay tuned for the concluding section of this panel on music, by music, with music, where these same ideas will be expressed in that universal language, which is music. Thank you, Jacques Cheminade, the president of Solidarité, Progrès in France, for your opening comments. We turn now to a message from Celeste Sáenz de Miera of Mexico. She is the Secretary General of the Journalists Club of Mexico, which is a 70-year-old political institution in the country with a proud history of defending the causes of sovereign national economic development and freedom of expression to bring about the betterment of all society. On December 10th, 2022, the Journalists Club honored Helga Zepp-LaRouche and the Schiller Institute with their prestigious International Freedom of Expression Award. She speaks here today on reflections on Helga Zepp-LaRouche's 10 Principles for a New Paradigm.
I'm not listening.
Gracias, queridos amigos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, dear friends. Many thanks. This is Celeste Sáenz de Miera, Secretary General of the Journalists Club of Mexico and President of the Journalists Club of Mexico. And also of the Journalists Club of Mexico, on behalf of our national and international delegations, as well as the International Federation of Journalists of our club. We send our warm greetings. We thank you greatly for the contributions you are making in favor of peace, in favor of reason. I would like to thank Maestra Helga Zepp-LaRouche specifically, who all of us here so greatly admire, and who has organized this conference. Before proceeding, I would like to emphasize why we granted her the International Award of Journalism and Freedom of Expression. We know that the Schiller Institute has been attacked in various ways, that people have been threatened, including Helga herself. There are obviously people who are opposed, who do not want knowledge to grow or the spirit to flourish and not be dulled, who do not want the human spirit to shine, which are the things that bring us honor. So that is why I want to greatly thank each and all of the scientists, the philosophers, the academicians, the economists, all of those who are involved in the Schiller Institute's drive for knowledge. Dear friends, at this time, when more than ever we are all in favor of world peace, I recall, and I say this in a somewhat bemused way, not because it is so, but because that's how we view it. We used to think that it was, and it would continue to be obsolete. The issue calls for world peace. In the past, we would have young women in beauty contests who would compete in these contests. And the majority would say they were for world peace, and we viewed that as somewhat lacking in depth of concern or broader analysis. And now everyone's priority is to call for world peace, to demand world peace. Today, to demand world peace. Today we have the knowledge, we know today more than ever that the world is in danger, in fact, of having world war break out, which would be totally apocalyptic. In this conference, at this extraordinary moment, when the age of reason must come into being, lest humanity be annihilated, it is important to recapitulate that the phrase freedom of expression, the purpose of freedom of expression, the reason this concept was created was in fact to speak the truth, to be able to disagree, to dissent, but based on dialogue, and not use the concept of freedom of expression to lie, which is the exact opposite of what is or should be the objective of freedom of expression. It is fundamental to share every one of Helga's 10 principles to create a new paradigm, not only with our friends or in the media, for example, but starting with the individual, with our own homes, our own families, our own neighbors, our immediate environment, with our students, our listeners, viewers, in short, with our networks, with everybody we can impact. These 10 basic principles to create a new paradigm, a new international security and development architecture that our maestra, Helga Sepp LaRouche, proposes for the world, for our nations, so that from our particular situations, we can share with the world, we can interact with the human race, dear friends. Also, there are many other points, such as the obligation to apply knowledge to reduce poverty, to improve the lives of those who, due to various circumstances, are being marginalized. And nonetheless, what these war interests are doing is to further plunder those groups that have the least, dear friends. We have to increase life expectancy as much as possible, improve health, use science ethically. What is really fundamental is the quality of life and not economic interests, as we have seen recently. We must perfect creativity, the beauty of the soul, that would make us really human, solidarity, and serving others. Just as we must serve our fatherlands, we must also serve our full lives and those of others with respect for one another. So to be in a center of knowledge, of creativity, where accurate information is produced, hard facts, as they are called, for this to happen is a privilege. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, with all the humility of which I'm capable, to thank you profoundly for your work in which we should all be involved. Let it be so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Celeste Sáenz de Miera, for your opening the discussion among the other panelists of this issue of the 10 principles regarding that Helga Sepp LaRouche had proposed. And it will perhaps interest our viewers to know two things about Celeste Sáenz de Miera. One, that she herself has faced very significant security problems as a journalist in Mexico who has continued and insisted on presenting the truth. And we recognize that and we come to her defense. Secondly, it was her distinguished father, Professor Sáenz de Miera, who was the founder of the Journalists Club of Mexico. And he was, among other things, the press secretary of then President José López Portillo, who many of you know was a good friend of Lyndon LaRouche, in particular beginning at the time when LaRouche visited Mexico, and met with López Portillo in 1982. We now turn to Argentina, to Julio Devido. Mr. Devido was Argentina's Minister of Federal Planning, Public Investment and Services for 12 years, from 2003 to 2015, during the governments of both Nestor and Cristina Kirchner, governments that were both hated and feared by the City of London and Wall Street because of their commitment to high technology economic development in cooperation with other nations, emphatically including China and Russia. Mr. Devido played an instrumental role in developing and implementing much of that policy, after which he served as a federal congressman from 2015 to 2017. He will talk today about BRICS Plus, bringing the Belt and Road Initiative into the Americas. Mr. Devido?
Buenas tardes, Denis. En primer lugar, quiero comenzar esta exposición.
Good afternoon, Dennis. I would like to start the presentation by first thanking the Schiller Institute and its leader, Helga LaRouche, as well as Dennis Small, for the honor of being invited to this conference, which calls for peace as a standard for universal coexistence. It also gives me the chance to share views with distinguished speakers from many speakers from seven countries or more, from 6 different continents. A clear sign of the ecumenic nature of this institute. If I can share a brief anecdote, during the first visit of President Nestor Kirchner to the United States in 2004, our current Vice President Cristina Fernandez Kirchner remarked to President Bush that, in her opinion, the New Deal promoted by President Roosevelt and his economic policy, which Keynesianism, explained the enormous post-war economic development of the United States. Bush answered at once that this breakaway growth phenomenon was due to phenomenal investments in industry to win the war. It is clear then that for President Bush and the interests and voters that he represented, war was unequivocally a reason for growth and development in his nation. We must reflect here that those of us who've been educated in the usual academic curriculum were taught that history is made up mainly as a succession of wars, from the Median Wars between Persians and the Greeks, the Punic Wars between Romans and Carthaginians, the Roman conquest of Europe, the Chinese Mongolian Wars, the 100-Year War between France and England, as well as Napoleon's military campaigns and so forth. During periods of peace, such as Pericles' century in Greece and Caesar Augustus's times, during which Jesus was born, these moments of peace were few and brief, such as the Peace of Westphalia and the Minsk agreements, whose violation gave rise to the war between Ukraine and Russia, and also, as many of the aforementioned conflicts have caused and continue to cause, racial and religious persecutions leading to holocausts. To get to the point, no doubt, one of the causes of the war in Ukraine were persecutions carried out against a Russian minority in Donetsk. The point Bush was making on that past occasion clearly identifies the will to economic and financial power of what we know as Wall Street, which turns out, as Lyndon LaRouche explains it, which turns out nominal wealth unsupported by any physical assets or production through a process of hegemonization. They seek to dominate our peoples from outside of our countries, looting resources, undermining our sovereignty, and leading unfailingly to fratricidal conflicts, to processes of national disintegration by the left and the right, driven by all-powerful ruling empires. The British model is a near perfect example of the strategy And Dennis Small has explained it perfectly well in one of his reports from January this year. This economic and financial power, represented in our countries by corporate oligarchies, which are allied and subordinated to the centers of world economic and financial power, have increasingly absolute political and fundamentally economic power over all government administrations, which they hegemonize and dominate through artificial concocted indebtedness run through multilateral credit organizations, all of which leads unequivocally to a breakdown of our societies and thus our culture and our nationality. In his masterwork, The Prince, Niccolo Machiavelli showed us already 500 years ago how this works. I also believe that while it is a good idea and a good thing to encourage mediation by the church through the papacy, as proposed by the Schiller Institute and its various speakers, in the sense explained by LaRouche, on the basis of writings by His Holiness Benedict XVI, based on De Pace Fidei, Bishop Nicholas of Cusa's work on the need for a heavenly council to build peace, referring generally to the world and the main religions. I also believe we should analyze the role played by the church through John Paul II, together with Ronald Reagan, in what we now call the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union, which marked the end of the so-called Cold War, with a Western triumph for a clearly unipolar world, which underlying the reality which we face and which concerns us today. To this end, and to thwart the actions of these oligarchies, it is key to reclaim political initiative by drawing down public debate and moving towards sovereign planning and management of our natural resources, and returning foreign trade authority to the state in keeping with the nation's natural resources as the true wealth of the nation. I therefore consider it a fundamental necessity to work on the processes of joint proactive regionalism, as was said in the previous conference, regional infrastructure projects and the creation of financial instruments to serve as trade currents, as clearly proposed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, referring to BRICS Plus, first among neighboring countries, and then on a regional level, such as, for instance, in Latin America, through organizations such as Mercosur, UNASUR, and also CELAC, which brings in also Central America. The Belt and Road Initiative will also play a key role in this. At this stage, we must strive, especially for Mexico and Argentina, to join the BRICS. We in Argentina, during the Nestor Kirchner and Cristina Fernandez administrations, during which I served as the country's federal planning minister of federal planning, we advanced infrastructure financing programs in the framework of a genuinely multilateral foreign policy, with absolute preference for our main trading partners, in this case, Brazil and China. This led us, even before the Belt and Road Initiative was launched, to negotiate with China financing to the tune of $20 billion to build 2 nuclear plants and 2 hydroelectric dams to empower Argentina's productive development through energy sovereignty. Unfortunately, these projects were abandoned, frozen by President Macri's neoliberal government that followed us, who is an agent of Wall Street interests in Argentina. But I have no doubt that the signatures supporting this important global project will revive this initiative. I am convinced that both the entry in BRICS, as well as our rise to the global challenge that the Belt and Road Initiative offers us, will be a very important contribution to the title theme of this conference on building peace as a new security and economic development architecture. Thank you very much. Dennis. And I will return the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Julio Devido from Argentina. And the issues which you have raised of the need for different regions of the world, such as Iberoamerica or Africa and Asia, to work with the emerging new security and development architecture, the Belt and Road and so on, is exactly the theme which we will now turn to develop from other areas of the world. The first series of speakers will address the question of Africa and China's cooperation with Africa in particular, to put the issue of the development of the nations of the South as the centerpiece of building a secure solution that actually addresses the underlying causes of war. Our first speaker in this addresses us from China. This is Professor Liu Haifang. She is the Associate Professor at the School of International Studies of Peking University. She previously worked for the Institute of West Asian and African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and was a visiting scholar at the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. She serves today as Director of the Center for African Studies at Peking University and is Vice Secretary General of the Chinese Society of African Historical Studies. Her talk today is titled The EU-China-Africa Relations and the New Architecture.
Good evening, good morning, or the noontime to wherever you are. First of all, I want to say thanks to the invitation of the organizer. It's a really a great honor for me to be, I think I am the only Chinese speaker to talk over such an important conference at such an occasion. I think at this moment, it's really important to have as more as possible international conference dialogue as this one. And in this way, I truly feel honored to be able to share my thoughts. Due to the time zone, I don't have the convenience to really join. So I use this kind of a record to share my thought. And I also look forward in future, either in China or elsewhere, I still can have a more opportunity to interact with all of you. Thank you again. So my topic is really trilateral cooperation. I, as a scholar, also working in Chinese, one of those oldest universities, probably also prestigious, and then serves as the director of Center for African Studies. I also frequently receive guests, either from African continent and then beyond, and all coming to discuss about either African development or China-African cooperations. So for many years, trilateral cooperation is also a topic either from academic levels or from other areas, people also coming to discuss this issue with me. And then from one of those kind of groups, they are American diplomats who are rather resident in Beijing. And then I still very clearly recall since 2015, the year our leader participated UN assembly, and then he made the note about how US-China should have more cooperation on African affairs, of course, other developing countries to join hands to enhance. And then soon enough, the two governments made an MOU about the US-China cooperations, trilateral cooperations, and then those diplomats, they start to frequently coming to my office, and then we talk a lot of time over coffee about how to enhance. And of course, I had my previous investigations, my interactions with so many Chinese companies in Africa. So that's what I could offer to exchange with American colleagues. But suddenly around 2017, 2018, they also came. Each year they came many times, but they stopped to ask these questions again. And then they start to only focus on what are the new development of China-African cooperations, what are new measures, so on and so forth. And likewise, when I receive German colleagues, EU colleagues working in either Beijing or elsewhere, they also switch the topic. So that's what from 2017, 2018, I start to ask back. So what's wrong with you? You don't ask me about trilateral cooperation anymore. So why you stop to ask? And of course, we all understand the changes rather coming from those moments. And then I guess today's topic, when Sheila Institute organized such a conference about this heavy change, this epochal change era, it's not a start from nowhere. It's not only happened with the Ukraine war, it's rather have been there. And then we as scholar can understand it from a little bit longer perspective. So another very quick case is about Sudan's case. We all know that when Sudan Bashir government has a very bad relationship with US was sanctioning, and then there was no business diplomat at all. The dialogue actually started from China. US government rely on the Chinese special envoy so much. Chinese special envoy was also put in the places, the mechanism designed as a new mechanism started by then. So whenever the Chinese American scholar or government representative, we sat together discussing about the old beautiful days of those trilateral cooperation, we never ever forget about Sudan as such an important case. But this is not only part of the how, politically the US can use China as a channel to work with one of those fragile or, whichever better word that the US government back then was used for Sudan. And then we know the Sudan was separated into the two. This is in South Sudan. And then Chinese different actors has been joining this country and then doing lots of different types of development programs. One of the actors I want to share with you is really 4 of my students. This young 4 students, they graduated with their master degree, and then they didn't find proper places to show their capacity in China, so they decided to go to Africa. And then in Uganda, this is in Uganda, they identified in this country the oil sector is going to be booming, and then we know that soon enough there would be oil produced. And then so back then around 2017, why they firstly arrived, they noticed indeed this is really such an important need to help local people prepare for the scale. So they had such a company, maybe we can call it a social entrepreneur, because they don't have lots of investment. They cannot invest even for business or other investment. And then they all are professionally trained as oil sectors. So therefore they start such an academy to train local people. And so enough, they had a lot of success and a lot of acknowledgement from Ugandan government. Ugandan government now even use their academy as one of the pioneer to help with their youth development. And nowadays they now move to South Sudan for about 2 years, maybe 3 years. So during the whole period of time of COVID, you could say how this is an obvious mark. They all have their mask. And then so we understand this is during the COVID, and that they have trained so many people in South Sudan. So for me, South Sudan's issue has a lots of a dimension, not only about the politics, how the North and the South couldn't get along, but there are also other very important issues, livelihood, and where the youth can have a proper livelihood. So in such a program, there's several young Chinese graduates. They brought lots of American and European scholars and then engineers helping with the trainings. And then sometimes they also have their Chinese technician to be the teacher to train the local people. So this, their academy, Sunmaker, almost becoming only one in many countries. So now they have branches in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Seychelles, and then they are preparing to move to many. And they are sort of change makers for me, truly the change makers. And then you can see how they are bringing different people from different countries together to help with the solve for the African very urgent need to provide a job, provide proper trainings for the youth. So this is just quickly coming to my main topic. And then today's international environment is so bad for China, for China's collaboration with different partners. And then I think the misunderstanding is the main things. During those beautiful old days, as I said, the past 10 years time with lots of trilateral cooperation, people have harnessed so much knowledge about from different partners, what you could handle, what the other is strong, and then the what African is good at it. So that the trilateral helping there, really the global development agenda was seemingly in a very nice, in a very beautiful way. But then suddenly this recent years, we don't know what happened. The main reason we know only due to the fact that the bad impressions, and then even the very negative attitude towards the whole China. So this is a very much a pity for us. And then my older colleagues always speak to our European American colleagues, please don't worry about China-African relations, because China is whatever China does in Africa is so much supervised or monitored by so many different stakeholders. I think this only could happen in a period of time or in a working mode like the trilateral cooperation. If you could have a candid dialogue, if you can have a good relationship, even to pursue a trilateral cooperation, then each side could harness the momentum and then to develop further. Now, similarly, all this stopped. And then for me, this is such a pity. And then I want to use this older period of time, the past trilateral cooperation stories to show how importantly when the liberal international development order or the attitude of the peace is important, please don't neglect that China's own development peace is also contributing to the world's development. And then it specifically help to deal with poverty, to deal with lack of skill, and it help with the people's livelihood, and therefore can be helpful for self-sustained future for the whole human beings. So for me, this is my main purpose. I really hope all people from different part of the world can jointly to have a human-centered perspective to really helping each other instead of to let this world going down and then to even have a war and see and then the worst situation happened. This is really my very humble contribution. I really hope there could be more engagement, more interactions. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu Haifang from China, for taking the time to present the Chinese view of the need for trilateral cooperation, taking the case study of Africa. I can assure you and everyone listening that the Schiller Institute not only shares your desire to have cooperative, friendly relations among our countries, but it is also our view that it is emphatically required that both the United States and the nations of Europe join with the Belt and Road Initiative for developing global economic advance. Not only should there be no decoupling, there must be a policy of recoupling our economies in the direction indicated by Lyndon LaRouche. Now, on this question of Chinese-African relations, we'll be hearing more about this, and the issue of natural resources and who they belong to and how to use them has always been at the center of discussions of the New World Economic Order. So our next speaker is from Uganda. It is Elison Karuhanga. He's a partner with the law firm Kampala Associated Advocates. Over the course of his career, he has represented local and international clients in various sectors, including oil and gas, telecommunications, construction, banking, and government. He is a trained oil and gas lawyer and a member of the Uganda Chamber of Mines and Petroleum. He will speak to us today on Uganda's oil project and energy independence.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody joining us from wherever you're joining us from. It is a great honor and privilege to be with the Sheila Institute discussing Uganda's oil project and energy independence. Very briefly, for those who do not know, my name is Elison Karuhanga. I am an advocate of the courts of Uganda, a partner with the law firm Kampala Associated Advocates. And I am honored, humbled, and privileged to be sharing my thoughts on an oil project in the middle of Uganda. Uganda is an African country, as you know, it's a landlocked country that discovered 6.5 billion barrels of oil. The oil in Uganda is 1.5 billion barrels of it so far recoverable. That's just in 40% of the area. And the country has resolved that it will have a crude oil export pipeline and a refinery, and it will also have commercialized its liquefied petroleum gas. So this project reached financial close, a final investment decision was made by the investors in Total Energies and CNOOC, the Chinese national oil company. And the project is on course. The construction of a refinery is going to happen with other investors, but the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline has commenced, and the development of the oil fields that are codenamed Tilenga and Kingfisher. This project is in the middle of an interesting period in human history. We are alive in Uganda more than anywhere else to the realities of climate change. We understand more than most the dangers of climate change. In the 1990s, in 1995, Uganda inserted in its constitution a fundamental human right to a clean and healthy environment. Uganda has no problem with the concept of a clean and healthy environment. But that does not mean it is an environment where we must conserve poverty. We have come to the realization that the biggest threat facing our people is not the threat that our grandchildren will face, serious though that threat may be, but it is also, along with that threat, the threat that we face today. In Africa and in Uganda, we are concerned about many things. We are concerned about the climate. We are concerned about the effects of climate change today, but we are also concerned and deeply concerned about the effects of poverty today. There is an argument that we need to see a change in the oil price. We need to see a phase out of fossil fuels. And this argument seems to suggest, and you can correct me if I am wrong, that the solution is what we phase out fossils. And how do we phase out fossils? We stop any new investments in oil and gas. Once we stop new investments in oil and gas, we make oil and gas as expensive as possible. And once oil and gas is very expensive, the world will be forced to transition to renewables once the fossils have been completely outpriced by all methods available to human ingenuity. That all sounds very nice when you think about it as an activist, when you think about it from a European capital. when you think about it from a rich, developed country. But what does that mean when broken down in real terms? That means that the higher the price of fuel, we have now learned that a high oil price does not hurt oil companies. 2022 saw a rise in oil prices and record profits from oil giants. The only people who pay for this transition will be poor people. And in this side of the world, in Africa and Uganda, we have paid enough. We have sacrificed enough. We have been guinea pigs for way too long. We cannot continue paying for these transitions. We cannot, on our end, continue to transition from darkness to deeper darkness in a night already devoid of stars, to quote one great American. The fact is simple. The fact is irrefutable. The fact is that we must preserve the environment and defeat poverty. We must not allow this transition to happen on the backs of the poorest people in the world. We must not allow this a transition that says no new oil projects, which means that Norway continues to produce 2 million barrels of oil, which means that Saudi Arabia continues to produce 10 million barrels of oil, which means the United States continues to consume 20 million barrels of oil. But it means countries like Uganda and Mozambique cannot start producing. The transition that favors incumbents, the transition that favors the rich, the idea that the poorer people of the world should bear the brunt of energy poverty and should pay for this transition is totally unacceptable. And this is not just true in Africa or Uganda. Across the world, working people, even in rich industrialized nations, it is the people on lower incomes who are going to be forced to pay under a theory of increasing the price of oil. The fact is simple. For as long as the alternatives are not available, we must look to fossil fuels to power our world. And in Africa, we are tired of not being powered. So in Uganda, we have decided, come hail or high water, that we are going to develop our energy projects, that we are going to do it in a responsible and efficient manner. It is one of the lowest carbon emitting projects in the world. It is being conducted in the most responsible manner imaginable. It is not perfect, but every day we strive to make it better. It is not a solution to all our challenges. It does not present a magic bullet. It does not present the ultimate solution to all our economic challenges, but it represents a step and a start. And we need steps and we need starts. And those who are living in the comfort of wonderful palaces, those who are living in the comfort of heated swimming pools and wonderful houses, those who are flying on private jets to moralize and lecture us, we are happy to receive their ideas. But frankly, at this time and on this occasion, we are not willing to follow through with them. We have listened far too long. We have had a copious supply of people telling us to follow the lead of the West and of people who are transitioning. But now, I think it's becoming ridiculous for us to start taking lectures about our 200,000 barrels of oil from people who are consuming 20 million barrels of oil. For us to start paying for this transition when we contribute 0.00%, 0.003% to global greenhouse gas emissions. So I can say that Uganda's oil project represents a significant opportunity for our country to be energy independent. And anybody who thinks that we are not going to take advantage of this opportunity to fulfill some ego somewhere, or to worship at the altar of a religion whose priests are carrying a dagger in their cloaks and stabbing it in the back, that person is terribly, terribly mistaken. At this time, in this period, and at this moment, I am of the humble opinion that Uganda has no choice and no option but to march along with its project, to build its pipeline to Tanzania, to finance its refinery, and to start its journey to energy independence. Ladies and gentlemen, I remain Elison Karuhanga, honored, humbled, grateful, and thankful for the opportunity to share my very humble thoughts.
Thank you, Elison Karuhanga of Uganda. Our viewers will want to know that Mr. Karuhanga, along with many of the other panelists, will be available in the question and answer period for further discussion, despite the fact that it is very late at night in Uganda. And we thank him and the other panelists who are in very late time zones for joining us and helping us with this discussion process. Continuing with the question of Africa, from Africa, on the issue of African Chinese development in particular, we have Professor Yoro Diallo. He is from Mali and residing in China. He heads the Institute of African Studies at Zhejiang Normal University in China. He was also a researcher at the National Museum of Mali, president of the Malian National Committee of the International Council of Museums, and he was a Malian diplomat for 22 years, from 1995 to 2017. In that capacity, he served as advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mali. He was first counselor at the Embassy of Mali in Senegal and first counselor at the Embassy of Mali in Beijing. Today, he will talk about Sino-Africa cooperation, building a community of peace and shared development.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers participants, bonjour. Bonsoir, selon que vous soyez en Afrique, en Europe, en Asie ou en Amérique. Permettez-moi avant tout d'adresser aux responsables de l'Institut Schiller mes sincères remerciements et ma profonde gratitude pour m'avoir invité à cette conférence internationale. Mes chaleureuses félicitations pour le succès de l'organisation. C'est un important événement.
This conference is participating in the ongoing debate Ladies and gentlemen, unilateralism, protectionism, these are factors which are affecting world peace. The threats which are the factors which are threatening peace. Where is the UN? This is the question that peace and justice-loving people around the world are asking themselves. In this difficult and complex context, a source of peace and development has been unfolding for some time to enrich international relations and serve as an example for the international community. This is Sino-African cooperation. When talking about Sino-African cooperation, it is important to take a look at contemporary history, which is an immutable witness to historical truth. History teaches us that since its foundation in 1949, the People's Republic of China has never provoked a war or a conflict, nor has it engaged armed forces in a foreign country. Its conduct is based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which are shared by African countries that have problems in overcoming the consequences of foreign dominations. History teaches us that Sino-African relations, which took off in the context of the suffering of all sorts of domination, took a new turn with the non-aligned movement. Indeed, in 1955, 29 African and Asian states met in Bandung, Indonesia. The Bandung Conference of the Damned of the Earth, stressed the urgent need to encourage economic development in the Africa-Asia zone. Since then, China and Africa have supported each other in their desire to emancipate themselves and follow their own development paths. The struggles for independence will forge a solid and sincere friendship. It is in times of hardship that true friendships are forged, it is said. In 1978, thanks to the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, China launched a policy of reform and opening up, which will allow the country to achieve real miracles in all fields of development. Firmly committed to the spirit of Bandung, China and African countries decided in Beijing in 2000 to establish the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, the FOCAC. Since then, the cooperation between China and Africa has grown stronger over the years. In 2013, 10 years ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping launched the principles of sincerity, effective results, friendship and good faith, and the pursuit of the greatest good of shared interest in Sino-African relations. Since then, this cooperation has been making great achievements for the benefit of both sides. The Chinese president made many official visits to the continent and participated in video conference with African colleagues. China has been Africa's largest trading partner for 13 consecutive years. The volume of Sino-African trade for the year 2000 is estimated at over $260 billion. The growth of the Chinese imports for Africa has been once again outpaced the growth of Chinese exports to Africa. 52 African countries and the African Unity Commission have signed cooperation agreement with China under the Belt and Road Initiative. The 2015 Johannesburg Summit established the Sino-Africa Conference on Poverty Reduction and Development as an official instrument for the FOCAC. In July 2018, President Xi Jinping made his 9th visit to Africa, his 4th as President of the People's Republic of China. At the 7th FOCAC Summit held in Beijing in September 2018, the two sides worked together on the theme China and Africa building an even stronger community of destiny through win-win cooperation. Beijing 2018 gave new impetus to the Sino-African Cooperation for Shared Development. The summit closely linked the FOCAC with the Belt and Road Initiative, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the African Union's 2063 Development Agenda, and the National Development Strategies of African countries. At the summit, President Xi Jinping confirmed that China will always be a good friend, a good partner, and a good brother to Africa. The summit also stressed the importance of synergy between the Belt and Road Initiative and the African Union's Agenda 2063. On August 18, 2022, the coordinators meeting of the implementation of the follow-up actions of the 8th Ministerial Conference of the Forum on China-African Cooperation held in Dakar noted the success of the 8th conference. Despite the tensions on the international scene, hegemonic practices and intimidation, China and Africa have stayed the course by focusing on cooperation, advancing their cooperation infrastructure, completing several major projects, including the Fonjoun Bridge in Senegal, the Nairobi Highway, the Kribi-Lola Bay Highway in Cameroon, and the 10 Ramadan LRT in Egypt. In terms of loans, the billions of dollars that China is devoting to Africa are mostly long-term repayable loans. In this regard, it is important to note that 35% of the external debt of African governments is held by multilateral institutions such as the World Bank. 32% of the said debt is held by private lenders and only 20% by China. China has forgiven the debts of 17 African countries out of the 23 interest-free loans that were due at the end of 2021. China is ready to redirect $10 billion to its SDRs to Africa. And on the subject of debt, during the press conference on the sidelines of the 2018 Beijing summit, the president of the Republic of Senegal, Macky Sall, said, "We Africans know what we want in our cooperation with China. The debt we have with China is very well under control. There is no doubt about it." Despite this solemn declaration, inappropriate, if not arrogant statements are being made about the Sino-African cooperation. Over the past 2 decades, through the FOCAC, China has helped Africa build more than 10,000 kilometers of highways, 6,000 kilometers of railroads, hundreds of airports, ports and power plants, and as well as more than 130 medical facilities, 45 stadiums, and more than 170 schools. More than 21,000 Chinese health workers have been sent to China to treat over 200 million patients. Today, China is the largest provider of scholarship and training to African countries. From January to November 2022, Africa-China trade amounted to $258.9 billion. This exceeds the total amount of trade between Africa and China in 2021, which is $254 billion. As a result, China maintains its leading position as the continent's largest economic partner. Chinese imports of African products reached 70.6 billion in 7 months. China has signed an exchange of letters with 12 African countries on zero tariffs for 98% of their export products to China. Many African agricultural products have already reached the Chinese market. The China-Africa Joint Centers for Exchange, Demonstration and Training in Modern Agro-Technology have been launched. Chinese companies are increasing their investment in the agricultural sector in Africa. Through the 100 Enterprises in 1,000 Villages initiative, Chinese companies are helping to create jobs, reduce poverty, and improve the livelihoods of rural households in Africa. In the field of health, China has supplied more than 189 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine to African countries. Currently, the joint production of COVID-19 vaccine in Africa has reached an annual capacity of about 400 million doses. The field of peace and security recorded on the Second China-Africa Forum of Peace and Security, China has provided military assistance to countries in the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Gulf of Guinea. China is the first country to support the African Union's membership to the United Nations Security Council and the G20. It tends to encourage the G20 to take strong actions to support an enhanced role for the African Union and African countries in the global governance system. On January 11, 2023, the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs, Qin Gang, dedicated his first trip abroad to Africa when he went to Addis Ababa to participate in the ceremony marking the completion of the headquarters of the African CDC. He thus followed the tradition established by Chinese diplomacy for 33 consecutive years. On these occasions, he reaffirmed the strengthening of solidarity and cooperation with African countries remains a priority of Chinese diplomacy, and with that, whatever the hazards of the international scene. African Union Conference Centers, the headquarters of the African CDC, the Mombasa, Nairobi, and Addis Ababa railway lines, the numerous roads, electricity, telecommunications, port, and other projects carried out all over the continent undoubtedly contribute to development. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude my speech by saying that in view of the concrete achievements, the ongoing projects of the common projects for the shared development of China and Africa remain the flag bearers of sincere, exemplary South-South cooperations that brings hope to the peoples in the field of international cooperation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Yoro Diallo from Mali, speaking to us from China. And our final speaker from Africa is Dr. Fred Membe of Zambia. He's the president of the Socialist Party of Zambia, and he's the founder and the former managing director and editor-in-chief of The Post, a daily newspaper that was established in 1991. He is a recipient of numerous media awards, including the United States National Association of Black Journalists and World Press Hero Award. He speaks to us today about the age of colonialism must be replaced by win-win cooperation.
Shared past experiences and similar aims and goals have brought China and Africa close together. In our fight for national liberation and independence, China and African countries supported each other and expanded mutual and political trust in the process. On major international and regional issues, China and Africa have coordinated their positions and jointly safeguarded international equality and justice. China-Africa friendship has not been an overnight achievement. It is something that has been built over a long period of time. China and Africa have been through a lot together. China was there for us when we can say nobody or very few were there for us. Our cooperation started with our forefathers. Chairman Mao and the leading leaders of our countries and national liberation movements started to get together, shared common agendas, common ideals on which this relationship has been built. Ours is not a happenstance relationship. It's a strategic alliance or coming together. Africa has a lot to learn from China. The path to development that China has opened for countries of the South can benefit Africa a lot. The path of development that Western Europe took is no longer open for us. It was development built on the exploitation of other countries, of other peoples. The Chinese path is one of win-win relationships. Africa has no other countries to exploit, to colonize, to oppress. So it means it has to deal with this development in a totally different way. And that way is the way China has shown us. China has never had colonies. China cannot be said to have exploited any country. China has been seeking win-win economic and political relationships. This is what Africa needs. Without that, we can't develop. Politically, on the key international issues, we have been standing together. China has supported our positions. And we Africans have got a duty to also stand by China when its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and other achievements are threatened. Today, China is target number one of those countries who feel only they have the right to develop. Only they have the right to peace. Only they have the right to a secured future. There are countries, there are politicians today in this world choking with envy over the achievements of China. China threatens no one. China provokes no one. If anything, China is a country that is being threatened all the time, that is being provoked all the time. But with exceptional, the outstanding leadership China has been able to construct over the decades, they are able to cope, they are able to deal with all these provocations in the most mature way we have ever seen. To stand for China, to support China, is to stand for ourselves, is to support ourselves, is to stand for our future, is to support our future. If China today was to be defeated, was to be destroyed, the future of us who live in the poor world would be threatened. In short, we have no future. So it is our collective duty to defend the progress China has made and is still making. And China is showing us that a more fair, more just and humane world is possible. Win-win relationships are possible. Relationships based on honesty, humility, equality, mutual respect are possible. What does this entail? This entails us spending more time studying, discussing, and trying to understand China more and more better. China needs to understand us, but we also need to understand China better and better. We need more meetings. We need more exchanges on our relations with China, on Africa's cooperation with China. It shouldn't be something we get into blindly. In short, all our leaders and all our people need to understand what we are doing, what we want to do with China. We need to interact with China more than we have ever done before. We need to visit China more, especially institutions in China that deal with the battle of ideas. Chinese think tanks need to interact more and more with African thinkers as well. There is more to do. There is more to be said. There is more to reflect over, so that we started to see things for ourselves. We started to analyze things for ourselves and come to our own conclusions. I say that because there's so much lies. There's so much calm. There's so much deceit. There's so much propaganda against China. This propaganda, this deceit, these lies have to be exposed. The truth needs to be known. Africa-China relationship, Africa-China cooperation is the only thing that can secure us a peaceful world and some prosperity for our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Membe, for your remarks. And this is the concluding part of the Africa section of this discussion. And I think the point by now should be quite clear. It were wise for the world to listen to the voice of Africa, especially the voice of Africa and China combined. That's well over 2 billion people, well, 1 billion Africans, over 1.4 billion Chinese. And if you look back and think of the map that we showed earlier, just the BRICS Plus alone, and that's not all of Africa that will soon be joining, is over 51% of the world's population. The cry for a new kind of world architecture is coming across loud and clear. We will now turn to Asia, and our first speaker is Abdul Fattah Raufi of Afghanistan, and he is a representative of the Afghan exile community.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, please let me to express my gratitude and appreciation for giving me the opportunity to share with you experiences of a nation becoming victim of multiple invasions and wars waged for very narrow geopolitical purposes. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am belonging to a nation which has been subjected multiple times in the recent history to invasions and wars waged not in the name of high and wide values of humanity, but in the name of very narrow geopolitical interests. All invasions and wars to which, for whatever reason, the Afghan nation has been subjected caused a catastrophe in the life of Afghan nation as a whole, even in the life of those Afghans who supported those invasions and wars. Those invasions victimized Afghan nation by destroying their villages, cities, infrastructure for food production, schools, universities, factories, roads, and bridges, which were built by a nation belonging to one of the poorest ones on the earth. Those wars killed, permanently disabled, or wounded millions of Afghans who were on a wrong time, on a wrong place. Those wars forced millions of Afghans to leave their homes to find food and shelter somewhere else, outside their region or even outside their native country. The last NATO invasion and war, waged by almost 50 countries of the civilized world against the poor Afghan nation, also caused enormous losses, pain, sorrow, and suffering to the Afghan nation. It is impossible to describe all those sufferings by words. After the departure of NATO from Afghanistan, they left a nation behind devastated by hunger, poverty, corruption, organized crime, diseases, and addiction to the drugs. The Afghan nation is now struggling with huge problems. A couple of them are as follows. Lack of sufficient food, because the food production facilities were deliberately destroyed. Lack of sufficient healthcare, because hospitals and clinics were destroyed. Healthcare specialists or staff was or killed or left the country. Lack of sufficient education, because schools and universities were deliberately targeted during the war. Teachers and lecturers or killed or left the country. Joblessness, because by civilized war opposed sanctions devastated economy of the country. Drugs addictions, because of flourishing drug trafficking during the years of invasions. Refugee crisis, because there is no hope for the economy recovery under the sanctions. Poverty, because this country gets no opportunity to rebuild its economy and eliminate the poverty due to successive invasions. If we take only the drug addiction problem from all above mentioned ones, then we talk about 4 million addicted people. It is circa 10% of the Afghan population, a huge number. Amongst the addicted people, one can find many educated people whose knowledge and expertise is now very needed to rebuild the country. Why become the addicted? Because they lost their hope for peace, security, and future in their country. During the NATO invasion, all job opportunities were in the hands of highly corrupt people. For each open vacancy, they required from them money, thousands of dollars. But these peoples were not able to pay such an amount of money to be selected. In the harsh winter of this year, they were faced definitely that death is the temperature in some area of Afghanistan dropped to minus 33 degrees of Celsius. But in the recent days, the government found shelters for them. They put all those 4 million all 4 million addicted people under protection in healthcare. It is a huge operation with very poor financial means. Now this is not a problem of civilized world, but a problem of a poor nation under the sanctions of the civilized world. The other huge problem of Afghanistan is the poverty. The main reason for the poverty in Afghanistan is foreign successive invasions in devastating wars resulting from the invasions. The country gets no opportunity to heal and recover from the invasions and wars and start rebuilding its economy to eliminate poverty. With condemning to the poverty the entire Afghan nation, the human rights of the whole nation has been abused. Even the rights of those who already left Afghanistan is the thing day and night about the future of their loved ones left behind. Dear ladies and gentlemen, no war is a good war. All wars cause huge suffering to the mankind and damage to its dignity. Therefore, all means should be used to prevent invasions and wars in general. Now it is the time to find peaceful means to overcome differences. Invasions and wars should be replaced by mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, trade, and share of cultural values. In my view, our planet has the potential to feed, house, and give a happy life for the whole mankind. So, let us stop invasions and waging wars, but start to cooperate, to feed, to house, and to give a happy life for the whole mankind. Doing so, we will ensure the respect for human rights, valid for entire mankind without exceptions. Finally, I am very obliged for giving me the opportunity to express the pain, sorrow, and suffering of a nation victimized by invasions and wars waged in the name of shared values, but not in the name of very narrow geopolitical interests. Thank you for your attention.
Can I be heard? Very good. Sorry about that little technical glitch there. I do really want to thank Mr. Fattah Raufi of Afghanistan for his abiding optimism about the future of all mankind and his country as well in the face of this terrible crime against humanity, which is occurring in Afghanistan and is continuing to occur, and which is a blight on the conscience of the entire planet and must be turned around. Our next speaker from Asia is from Pakistan, Shakeel Ahmad Ramay. He's a well-known advocate of the Belt and Road Initiative and its importance not only for fellow Asian nations, but for the entire world. He is the CEO of the Asian Institute of Eco-Civilization Research and Development. His speech today is on sustainable peace through inclusive development, a case study of the GDI and the GSI.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. There is no second opinion that the survival of this planet and the humanity is dependent on the peace and the peaceful coexistence between the human and the planet. But the question is how to get that peace. That peace can be only ensured by the two fundamental things. Number one, development. Number two, justice. If we look at the justice for that to achieve the justice, the social justice is the prerequisite. Without social justice, we cannot dream the justice. If we look about on the development, and the development which can ensure inclusive development, and the model which can ensure the human development, and the human development must be the heart of all the development programs. If they will come together, then we can talk about the peace, and that peace should be the beneficial for the humanity and the beneficial for the planet, because I believe planet and the human, they are equal partner of this universe. So we have to work for a model. In this context, if we have to look at the global level, there are two very special initiatives which are, I think, which can help us to achieve these two fundamentals, development and the justice which is based on the concept of the social justice. One is Global Development Initiative and second is Global Security Initiative. If we look at separately on those both initiatives, on the development on the side, the Global Development Initiative has been designed, which I analyze the model, that initiative has been developed on the basic needs of the countries and the basic requirements of the countries, and it has kept human at the center of this decision making. If we look at the 9 areas of Global Development Initiatives, it talks about the climate change. And the climate change is the biggest problem of today. It's not only the development environment problem, but it is also a security problem. It talks about the development financing. If we look around the world, the debt of the world is increasing, which is more than the 300 trillion now. And we need the financing which can ensure the development. But the debt circle which has been created by some institution, the financial institutions, especially the Western financial institution, that has created a problem. So countries has been entangled in the debt. So this initiative talk about the development financing. Then this initiative talk about the connectivity. It is also, connectivity is a basic requirement. Either in talk about the physical connectivity or we talk about the digital connectivity. These initiatives talking on the both sides. Then it's talk about the food security. If we look around that, how many millions, more than 800 million people, they are the food insecure, they need the food. And if we look around other trade and development, and countries are looking the opportunities for the trade, and they want to connect with a bigger market so they can help their people to come out of the poverty trap. And there are other part of that. Then if we look around Global Security Initiative, again when I analyze this initiative, it put the human at the center. It put the planet at the center for any type of actions or the programs. If you look at the 4 pillars of the Global Security Initiatives, first is talk about common. It means everyone's security must matter. It should not be like that one country's security or one person's security is more important than other country or the other person. So everybody's concern on the security must be taken care. Number 2, it must be comprehensive. This is in definition of comprehensive. It includes that we should tackle the security, not only the traditional securities, but also non-traditional security, like food insecurity, like climate change, environmental degradation, or the poverty, or the pandemic, and other type of the security threat to the humanity or the planet. We also have to take care of those security threats to the human and the planet. Number 3, coordinated or the cooperative. That's mean whatever policy making mechanism should be. It should be coordinated. All countries should be taken on the board. It should not be like that some countries take a decision and ask the rest of the world, you have to follow it. That will not work. And the worst impact of this type of the mentality or the policy framework is that now today we are facing different type of the security challenges and the peace is in danger. Number 4, sustainable security. It again means we also have to take care of the development needs of the people. That's why when I talk about the development need of the people, which are focused on the human and the planet, that's why I say it's a human-centric and the planet-centric initiative. So if the two initiatives can come together, I believe we can ensure the security at the global level, because security and the peace is required at this level. We are facing multiple challenges. I think the world need to come together and join hands with each other to tackle the issue of the climate change, to tackle the issue of the food insecurity. They should work together, they should pool their resources to meet the development gap of the world. And the financial gap of the world, which is in the trillions of the dollar, right now more than the $15 trillion up to 2040. And if we take it to the further, it can increase further. And if we look at the climate change, if we don't able to tackle that problem, it will be exacerbated in the coming years. So I believe, so all countries should come together and start try to build these initiatives. It should not be confined to one country. It should be a global initiative, and with the name suggests, I think China should also ask other countries, and China is asking all other countries, let's join hands to solve the problem. Let's focus on the development. Let's focus on the human and the planet needs, so we can create a beautiful world and a world where we can live with the peace with each other and we can enjoy the life. I want to conclude with one sentence. We need to keep in mind, that is my analysis from when I look at the history. Army can only win war. Army cannot win development or the peace. A peace can only be won by the development and the social justice and the justice. If we are failed to provide the development and the justice and the social justice to the people and the country, then I think the dream of the peace will be compromised. That's why I suggest we need to work more on the development-oriented initiatives. We need to join hands and work for a peaceful world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shakeel Ramay. And indeed, the only way to ensure a durable peace is through development. We now turn to the final speakers on this platform. This afternoon, there are 3 speakers left. We turn to the Spanish-speaking world, including Iberoamerica. But our first speaker is from Spain. His name is Marcelo Muñoz. He's the founder and president emeritus of the Cátedra China think tank of Spain. He's lived and traveled extensively in China over the past 45 years, and is in fact the only Spaniard, and possibly the only European, to know China from the inside and the outside over such a long period of time. He has just published his 4th book on China. It's called China is Back to Stay, which is appearing in Spanish and Chinese, and which is available on Amazon, and which I can heartily recommend for your reading. Today, his comments are on, if Europe decouples from China, it will sink into poverty.
I arrived in China in 1978 when China was the 120th economy in the world. Today it is second. I've had the good fortune of experiencing this transformation close up, living through it with their people. I've spoken at length with leaders of Chinese civil society, including politicians. And this experience, in fact, has forced me to open my eyes. I arrived in China as a grown-up man, over 40 years old, with a curriculum of teaching and organizing experience in various areas of business activity, which gave me a basis to open my eyes with knowledge. But above all, I arrived with an attitude of opening up to China, to dialogue with another world that I had never known, but this other world surprised me so greatly that it forced me to pay attention, constantly pay attention, which is where my experience and my books and speeches come from. I think that this decoupling is an illusion that comes from Western belief that we are superior, that we have the right to rule the world and others don't. China does not have this superiority complex. They don't have it. Perhaps they had it in history because they were the only truly powerful empire in the world, but now they don't. They want to talk. They want to dialogue. They don't want to decouple. What does decoupling mean? To renounce to China as the world's biggest seller, to reject China as a country with the greatest technological progress, to reject China as the country with the greatest degree of international partnerships, greater than the West, Africa, to a large degree, large parts of Asia, Latin America, and a good part of Europe too, where although they resist partnering with China. So decoupling is a chimera, an illusion. It's impossible to decouple from China. We decoupled during the pandemic, and as a result, we didn't have the medical equipment to fight it. We cannot decouple. If we decouple, we will sink into poverty. It would mean giving up everything that comes from China, which is presently the world's greatest exporter. Technological products, for example. Of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, or the New Silk Road, as it's also known, is a project through which China expresses the way in which it wishes to exist in the world, to cooperate, develop synergies, develop global connectivity, and so forth. This project has been moving forward. Then, suddenly, as what is happening in the West, which we forecast over the last 40 years, all of a sudden the West realizes China exists. So suddenly they realize how the importance of the Belt and Road Initiative, and they say, let's address the problem of a lack of global connectivity among countries and continents. So they decided to assign $650 billion to this global connectivity effort. At that time, since the Belt and Road Initiative began, China, not just China, the countries who participate in the Belt and Road Initiatives, not just China, but from all around the world, have invested since 2013 $1 trillion a year. Suddenly, G7 wakes up and decides to assign $700 billion. Ridiculous. I suspect that none of these G7 leaders knows or has added up how much has been invested in the Belt and Road Initiative over the years. $1 trillion a year with, I don't remember how many projects, some 280 around the world. Going from, by volume, they go through Pakistan, the highest elevation railroad in the world that runs from, and the longest from Yiwu to Madrid. And these projects have absorbed $1 trillion a year in investments per year. And suddenly we wake up and decide to launch similar projects to develop global connectivity with a $700 billion investment. Well, that's ridiculous. I believe that philosophy must be the fundamental basis of politics, and that, I believe, is where I agree, for the most part, with all of LaRouche's thinking, that philosophy is a foundation of human thinking about everything in human society. In fact, Confucian philosophy is an analysis of human society, of hierarchy in human society, the role of authority, the role of the emperor, of government, in service of the majority of the population. This is, we should not neglect these philosophical considerations. At this point, they have been set aside in international politics. We need to defend philosophy. I defend philosophy. And in this context, I think that the possibilities for a dialogue between the West, Europe, and the United States and China are immense possibilities, both from a political and as well as a philosophical point of view. However, if we only focus on differences, we will never materialize the advantages of working together. I ask in a simplistic way, or naively perhaps, what would the world be like if India had transformed itself like China has? Both economy, its technology, its science, and the development of its people. This 350 million people pocket of poverty would have disappeared, along with the mid-level poverty of another 400 million Indians. The world would be a different place. Why do we not invest our efforts, instead of fighting and focusing on our differences, finding ways of cooperating towards global governance, which is non-existent today. I go back to this again and again in my book. The world needs global governance. The world now is governed, ruled exclusively by the West, or almost exclusively by the West. Why don't we transform that government, into a global system of governance, uniting the three great powers of the world: China, the United States, and the European Union? Then they could progressively join or bring in mid-level powers such as Russia, Indonesia, and so forth. And this would be the seed kernel of the embryo of institutions of global governance, rather than fighting among ourselves and stressing our differences. That is the call that I make in my book, basically.
Thank you, Marcelo Munoz of Spain, of Cátedra China, for bringing to bear your 45 years of experience with and in China to this discussion, including on the deeper level of the philosophical issues involved in Western Renaissance thinking and Confucianism in the East. We turn now to comments from Pedro Augusto Pinho of Brazil. He's the president of the Association of Petrobras Engineers, AEPET, which is a vocal and highly respected institution which has always defended Brazil's right to full-set, high-technology industrial development. Their voice is particularly important at this time that the new Lula government has taken office in Brazil, with a stated commitment to resuming the country's path of South American integration and promotion of the BRICS and of the BRICS Plus. Mr. Pinho has asked that his remarks on the collapse of the financial system raises the danger of nuclear conflict be read to this gathering in English, which will be done by Jason Ross.
The West and the East have not had the same transformations, and not at the same time. The so-called world histories seek to categorize human beings, excluding the most important thing in their lives, culture. And cultures arise from the relationship of the human being to his environment. It's evident that the various types of contacts between societies modify cultural features, but not enough for us to believe in a single civilization, in globalization as an inevitable and monopolizing phenomenon. We will deal with the Western world, starting with the modern age. We can consider the 15th century as a watershed, where the demands of European society led to trade with the most faraway places, and the capitalist spirit took control of social relations. As a consequence of the development of these characteristics, in 200 years, the Industrial Revolution and the struggles for the division of wealth, now more abundant and geographically dispersed, emerged. Colonization and the impulse for participation and autonomy began. The 19th century consolidated these tendencies and marked its apex in the British Empire, where the sun never sets, and where it was decided what and with whom to share. We have seen that it required almost 400 years for the great transformation in the West, invading even Eastern space. Starting with the 20th century, the most radical alterations slowed down. Industrialization, after 200 years, gave way to sterile speculation. New forms of communications created, along with the circulation of messages throughout the planet, social division into sectors, unimaginable differences to the anthropologists studying human evolution. Throughout the 20th century, principally in the second half, stateless financial interests promoted two fundamental changes to obtain power, beginning in the 1960s. In the area of culture, the hippie movement, 1960, May 1968 in Paris, the Tlatelolco massacre in Mexico, and Woodstock, 1969. And in the area of energy, through the wars in the Middle East and Northern Africa, and the oil crises of the 1970s. In 1980, the financial interests put through financial deregulation, and the half-dozen tax havens immediately expanded to 85, spreading out across countries, cities, and the seat of financial power, the City of London. We can establish 1991, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, as the date of the rise of financial interests to power in the Western world, to impose across the planet the set of commandments established by the Washington Consensus. Between 1987 and 2008, there were 10 crises, all of them with the goal of transferring resources from nations and the national companies to the international financial system. USA in 1987, Japan 1990, 1992 Europe, 1994 Mexico, 1997 Southeast Asia, 1998 Russia, 99 Brazil, 2000 USA, 2001 Argentina, and in 2008 USA. But the stateless financial interests continued to issue more instruments without worrying about the burdens imposed by bailouts. The response of the financial world to bankruptcy has been, besides their continued looting through the crises, the launching of wars which cause death, destruction, and expense for the slightest of reasons. There are 24 such wars from 1990 to today, taking into account only those involving the US and NATO, directly or indirectly, in the Community of Independent States, the former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Congo, Ethiopia, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Syria, Tunisia, and between Israel and its neighbors. Today, the proxy war waged between NATO and the Russian Federation, which is demonstrating Russia's military and economic superiority, and with the predictable defeats for the financial world, represented principally by the United States, this gives rise to the threat of nuclear war, which would destroy all mankind and planet Earth. This is one more proof of the inhuman action of financial power, which always seeks power and money, and is always cynical, as history records in the slave trade, begun under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, 1562, and which lasted, in Brazil, until 1888. In the actions of Winston Spencer Churchill, the representative of the United Kingdom, in the Amritsar massacre of India in 1919, deliberate famine inflicted on the people of India and Ireland, the separation of India and Pakistan, and the repression of the Mau Mau revolt in Kenya. Let us unite in defense of human civilization.
Thank you, Pedro Augusto Pinho of Brazil, for your remarks sent to this conference. They're greatly appreciated. And we now turn to the final speaker on this panel before we turn to the question and answer session, which will be followed, I remind you, by a very important musical presentation. This final presentation is from Ambassador John Lander of Australia. He's a veteran Australian diplomat, and he served as director of the China section of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs. He was ambassador to Iran and deputy head of mission of the Australian Embassy in China. He spoke to an online meeting of the Washington, D.C.-based Committee for the Republic on January 18, 2023, on the topic of sleepwalking toward Biden's war with China, where he asserted that Australia is being mobilized to go to war with China on behalf of the United States, and insisted that the cause of this war is China's intent and capability to reorganize the world economy. He's questioned here by Gerald Belsky of the Schiller Institute.
A solution, which I think has to be introduced here, to both rebuild the American economy and collaborate with China. Now, you referred to the major cause of this war being the fact that China wants to change the economic rules internationally, and there's a growing movement for a new economic order. Now, my organization, the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche movement, has proposed that instead of trying to destroy China, we collaborate with China, and I think Australia should too, on the Belt and Road, which my organization had a role in helping to design. In fact, if you look at the policy of infrastructure development and development of manufacturing, this was the original American system as developed by Hamilton, later Roosevelt. It's been our tradition. Now, if the United States, which has been offered to join the Belt and Road by China, there's enough work to rebuild the world economy. Most of the world is joining this. So there is a global effort for a new economic order, which some people would rather have war to stop. And these are the financial forces, frankly, who have destroyed the United States economy. Now, we're proposing a discussion of a new economic order. We've even proposed 10 principles based on the question of national sovereignty, no empire, but collaboration through mutual cooperation, something new in history, which is end the geopolitical empire system. Now, how would you see Australia and the United States instead joining with China for the Belt and Road for the mutual benefit of all countries?
Well, again, I agree with everything that you've said. Australia, of course, back in 2014, when it welcomed President Xi Jinping to Australia as an honoured guest and signed a memorandum of understanding for participation in the Belt and Road Initiative, resiled from that position not too long after, in response to mostly protestations from America that we were exposing ourselves to a threat from China. Your point about the BRI, I think is quite correct. It's not just in Asia or in even Eurasia. There are 34 countries in Europe which are members of the BRI, out of a total of about 140 countries worldwide. 25 are in East Asia and the Pacific, 20 are in Latin America, 18 are in the Middle East and North Africa, and 6 are in Southeast Asia. So most of the rest of the world has already showed a great willingness to collaborate with China in the construction of a mutually beneficial economic order. Also, I think it is very significant that just recently in the United Nations, 90 Western countries voted against a resolution for the development of the new global economic order, but over 170 countries voted in favour of that resolution. So the West is kind of a standout, endeavouring to preserve this geopolitical divide between the powerful countries, the imperialist countries, and all of the rest. But so it's really a struggle at the moment between the West and the rest. But of course, there are rational players in both our countries, people in business in particular. So China's creation of the cross-border interbank payment system, which is seen as an alternative to SWIFT, the system of worldwide international financial transactions, which is controlled by Wall Street and London. The CIPS has shareholders who are Western banks. So we have hard-headed business people, banking people, who can see the advantage of participating in China's international payment system as well as SWIFT. And the other interesting point about the CIPS is that it is in fact interlinked with SWIFT. So the Chinese are still demonstrating a willingness to collaborate with the existing institutions in the West, but to do so more on the basis of an equal partnership rather than a subservient relationship.
Do I have audio? Okay. The miracles of modern technology. If they don't work at first, try again. So again, thank you, Ambassador Lander, for your contribution, and to round out the discussion with a presentation of the importance of the Belt and Road Initiative and for global cooperation around development as the direction of the solution to the crises facing humanity, including, most emphatically, the danger of war, and I would say of thermonuclear war, as we have been discussing throughout. We will now go into the period of the discussion period, the question and answer session for this panel. And as we are pulling up the video feeds of the people who will be involved in this, I do want to tell you one or two things. First of all, we will see the effects of the fact that many of our participants were in touch with us from time zones much later than ours here on the East Coast of the United States. In other words, it's really late right now in Africa. It's more than late in Pakistan or in China. And it's very late in Europe as well. So that said, let me say first that Celeste Sáenz of Mexico sent the following message. She said, "I'm very sorry that I will have to miss this opportunity of participating in the discussion period, but I do have a family event that I cannot absent myself from. I send my warm embrace, my greetings, and especially my great regards for the most admired Helga, and for all of those of you who are doing so much for the world to follow in a healthy, socially necessary, intellectual, and moral direction. I send you abrazos, a warm embrace, and my gratitude." I can also mention to you that I did receive a report in the course of this panel that there was a satellite meeting held at a university in Mexico City, Greater Mexico City, organized by one of our youth organizers down there of the LaRouche Youth Movement, Carolina Dominguez, who organized a meeting at the Technological University of Nezahualcóyotl in Mexico City. It is the engineering department, and they have apparently a very active aerospace division. And many of these students are participating or will be participating in an upcoming aerospace exposition, which will be occurring in the coming period, the coming days. So, having told you that, I'd like to know if we do have our panelists on board, and who I can see before me, if I'm not mistaken, is in order of appearance, Jacques Cheminade. I believe that is Dr. Membe, who is with us from Zambia. We have Helga Zepp-LaRouche. It's very late in France. It's very, very late in Zambia, and it's equally very late in Germany. We thank you greatly. We also have Julio Devido of Argentina, where it's a little later than here. And we also have with us Elison Karuhanga of Uganda, where it's also really, really late. And we want to express our great appreciation to all of you for helping us round out this discussion today. We will be very efficient because we need to, within 40 minutes or so, get to the part of the musical presentation, which is an integral part of this discussion today. And I think the way we're going to proceed is the following. I want to ask first Helga and then Jacques for a summary comment on the presentations and the second panel. And then I have some specific questions addressed to a number of you that have been coming in. And I would first ask Helga for her comments, and particularly, if you would, why music? Why do we have music at the end of this panel?
Well, because, it's the way of life. Culture is the way you think. It's not something added on. It's, Confucius said something very truthful. He said, look at the music of a country and you can see in what shape this country is. So since we reject the popular music of our present contemporaries, we always add classical performances if we can, and always try to have good representations of different cultures, because once people recognize the beauty of another culture, it opens the heart and it opens the mind. So it's a quite natural thing for us to do.
Okay, very good. Jacques, some overall response and comment on the entire discussion?
Yes, it's it creates this real in-depth enthusiasm that we can win because we are a world organization. And from different areas of the world come this motion towards peace and peace through justice. As Xi Jinping said, a global development initiative and a global security initiative. So this is in the direction of everything we have been fighting for since years and years, and since Lyndon LaRouche has been fighting for. So that's the first point. The second is that, in that sense, what Victor Hugo in his times called, I read his writings on this issue, a universal republic. So a universal republic is not something multilateral over the heads of the peoples and the nations. It's the nation states as a unity from diverse directions, from diverse cultures, bringing to all the best of them. And I think this is a lesson of what we heard from Australia to Asia to Spain to the whole world. And we are waiting for this musical event because it's in music that you have the best of the moment where the human mind comes to create. This is what Plato said in his seventh book of the Republic, with the famous allegory of the cave, where he says that music and seeing and looking and trying to understand the cosmos are the two things that uplifts human beings. So we have to think about that, and as Elga said with the 10 principles, conceive the action together of what we are doing in the next days to reach the goals in all countries, even in France and Germany, in all countries where the world needs us.
Okay, great. I am going to want overall comments from each of you as well, but let me also ask questions that are very specifically directed to some of you, because I think you can do both at the same time. So this first question is for our African participants, Mr. Karuhanga and Mr. Mimbe, and this comes from Abate, and what he said was, I see that there is a connection and relevance on the question of proxy wars and regime changes, often bloody, that are taking place in Africa to the question of world war. This happened historically and continues until now. Take, for example, the sad story of Lumumba of Congo, who, as you know, was brutally killed and removed from power, even though he was democratically elected. And then he goes on to say that the West's evil policy is being implemented at the expense of poor Ukrainians. So could you please talk about how Africa is denied the right to pursue development? For example, the case of Ethiopia's hydroelectric dam and other development projects in the continent. So in whatever order you gentlemen would care to proceed. All right. I will, if you're too polite, I will ask Mr. Elison Karuhanga first to respond.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting question. We have seen from the beginning of time that, not from the beginning of time, we've seen legitimacy in that sort of question. I think the issue of Lumumba that has been raised is an interesting example that has been raised. I think what is important to note, and I stand again to be corrected, is that the African relationship with the metropolitan centers of the West over the past couple of hundreds of years has been as a supplier of free labor, either in the form of slavery or cheap labor, and also as a supplier of raw materials. And the economic system has meant that whatever differences in economic theory exist elsewhere in the world, very many elites, powerful global elites, I don't want to sound undiplomatic, but powerful global elites have had a policy of the plunder of the continent. And of course, the killing of Lumumba, you will recall historically, we also saw when the UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld tried to visit the Congo to sort it out, he too was actually killed. So if you go back along that trajectory, the solution has always been the economic liberation of Africa, the ability of Africans to undertake developmental projects and to lift themselves up by being able to add value to resources and by being able to participate as not just suppliers of cheap labor or as suppliers of raw materials. So to briefly answer that question, I would suggest that in Africa, we don't want to look back and count the scores. We are not looking for Nuremberg trials for those who enslaved our people. We are not looking for war tribunals for those that colonized us. We are not looking for all sorts of things. We are looking to go forward, and to go forward with an opportunity to do projects like the electricity projects in Ethiopia or the energy projects in Uganda and Tanzania. And we are saying we must be given the right and the opportunity to be able to ensure that future generations of Africans do not continue transitioning from darkness to darkness. People, for example, who discuss transitions and energy fail to understand that for us, where we come from, what we are not interested in is continuing to pass on poverty and to continue to transition from darkness to deeper darkness. So in that regard, I hope I've done justice to the question. But in that regard, my answer would be, with regard to the conflict, of course, in Ukraine, I think by and large, African countries have taken a neutral position on the conflict for the simple reason that while we appreciate the horror of war, we are alive to many things that are happening on the continent. And so in summary, I would say that what we are interested in is the ability and the right to develop our home, to build our countries, and to be able to transition some of the poorest people in the world out of the dire needs of their poverty, and not so much in the settling of historical scores. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Membe, could you comment in general if you have broad comments, but also in particular response to the question addressed to you?
Yes. We have to bear in mind that our countries did not exist as countries before 1884-85. That is before the Berlin Conference. We were created as countries by them. We exist as countries, and we should exist as countries by their will. Even after fighting for our independence, for our liberation, they still do not accept us as independent people who should shape their own destiny, who should decide their future, who should decide what to do, who to do it with. Our leaders have to be dictated to who should be their friend, who should they cooperate with. Patrice Lumumba was killed simply because he was seen to be closer to the Soviet Union. The killings were not confined to the 60s. They continued even in recent years. Muammar Gaddafi was killed by the same people who divided Africa among themselves.
Our resources today have to be exploited in the way they want and by who they want. Today, some of our countries have the critical minerals needed for the 21st century technologies. Again, they wanted to exclude others from the exploitation and the benefit of those minerals. The behavior doesn't seem to change towards us. We are still being treated as children whose friends should be chosen for by the parents. The games they should play should be dictated by the parents. Where they go, what they do should be dictated by the parents. We have the right to independence. We have the right to self-determination. We have the right to peace. We have the right to live in equity, in solidarity, and in peace. But they don't seem to understand this. Africa has no military bases anywhere else. But today there's a proliferation of military bases in Africa by others. For what? For what? They talk to us about democracy, about choosing our own leaders. We choose our own leaders, they kill them. They impose puppets on us. Sometimes they even turn against their own puppets and kill them. Where will this end? We know where it began, but where will it end? When will it end? Today, they do not want us to deal with China. Today, they do not want us to deal with Russia, with Iran, and any other country of our choice. Today, they don't want us to choose our own path of development. We have to be told by them how to develop. We have been under their control since 1884, 85, when they set up our countries, when they divided Africa among themselves. We have been pursuing development paths decided by them. We are still in poverty. And they still want to continue that. They have failed to get us out of poverty. They have been perpetuating poverty among us. And they want to continue with us in that way. We are refusing to continue on that path in these new times, complex as they may be. And that's why we need platforms like this. We need meetings like this. Because the world we live in today is very complex. And this complex we live in needs new ideas. Not that there are no ideas before us, but complex situations like this continually need more and more new ideas, need more and more principles than ever before. Where are these principles going to come from? They are going to come from discourses like this we are having today. From the best of our economic thinkers, from the best of our political thinkers, from the best of our religious thinkers. Briefly, that's what I can say on this issue.
No, thank you very much. The fact of the matter is that just as leaders who threatened the global financial system were assassinated in Africa, I think it's important to take note of the fact as well that that has happened in the United States as well, and in many other countries around the world. In the case of the United States, McKinley, Kennedy. And I mention this not only for that specific point, but also because of the very next question, which comes to us from Argentina, from Enrique Box in Argentina. And I will address it, although he did not directly, but I will address it to Julio Devido of Argentina, and also Jacques, who may care to comment in his multiple capacities. This is a very broad question. It is, when will we stop talking about nations and start pointing to the real power, perched in the City of London and its branches, the Federal Reserve and Wall Street, and also not forgetting the names of the individuals that make them up? So, Mr. Devido, on that, and of course your broad comments on the discussion so far today.
Aprovechar la posibilidad de reconocer que gracias a Enrique Vox
I want to take the opportunity to thank Enrique Vox for being here, because it was he who put me in touch, Dennis, with you and the Institute, and this is why I'm fortunate to know you and Helga and your ideas. I believe that the Universal Republic that our French friend was referring to, Victor Hugo's concept, I'd say that touches the heart and mind of all of humanity. The greatest problem to carry into practice is clearly represented by this concentrated capital that LaRouche explained with such accuracy in the two excerpts that we were shown, which shows a concentration with an infinite number of zeros, magnitude. It is a true, concrete bankruptcy that leads to the possibility of a nuclear conflagration. This concentration of capital, this responds with in despair, just as the organizations that murdered Lumumba, because
gerente de esas empresas mineras.
The executive directors of these mining companies are from the same circles that have orchestrated our current catastrophe. The independence movements like Latin American unity organizations, African independence, Mercosur, CELAC, which for the first time are planning an association of Central, North, Central, and South America, such as Mexico, Argentina, as a integrated region. I believe that to make this dream that our African friends present, we need to trigger a transformational movement. The BRICS already gives us a superstructure, but there is a further need to develop economic infrastructure and end hegemonic conditions, which lead inevitably to liberation. We cannot expect, or compare rather, these liberation processes to those we experienced in the 60s and 70s, because humanity is in at a different stage. There were things that existed then that cannot exist today. But when I say proactive regional association, I'm talking about common infrastructure projects that bring us together, which are those that have this new Silk Road as their core. I was saying, both in terms of the previous presidents, Kirchner and Fernandez, in the relationship with China. Even before this relationship develops, there has to be a strong will China, of course, because of the strength of its economic power and has trends towards a constructive association based on stimulation of sovereign capabilities. Obviously, China is much greater today than it was, but this required a national leadership of the type that LaRouche represents in the United States, the power of evoking unity and sovereignty of peoples with a focused effort against colonialism and for integration.
Okay, excellent, very good. By the way, if anyone wants to jump in at any point, just raise your hand. The idea is a dialogue. If not, I will condition. Jacques, are you raising your hand there?
Yes, you.
It looked like it. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I was involved. Yes, I am involved in the capacity to be an Argentinian also. I was born in Buenos Aires. So I think that now comes the times of what Perón or Getulio Vargas, among others, tried to achieve, because our enemies are exposing themselves, which is an absolute danger in these times of absolute danger, but also a great opportunity. I like what Elison Karuhanga said. We have enough with the lectures of those who fly on their jets and live in mansions with swimming pools and swarms of servants. So this is a period which is finishing. We go either in the side of a world catastrophe or we get out of it. And I am optimistic on that because of this conference, because of what's happening in my country, of what's happening in the world. I think we are starting to get out of it. And thanks to what Lyndon LaRouche and LaRouche have shown, a way of going into a new paradigm, and what the directions of this new paradigm, the principles, then we can be very hopeful after this conference.
I want to switch for a moment to the issue of action to be taken, to return to some of the themes that were addressed, especially at the end of the last panel. And there are two questions related to this, and I would like Helga to address this naturally, but also I think it is something that both Elison Karuhanga and Fred Membe may have something to say about. Here are the two questions. One is from Mark, addressed to the Schiller Institute. He says, if any organization, private or public, wishes to engage any demographic, they must create media for that audience, otherwise known as marketing. What is the Schiller Institute view of creating messaging for any demographic outside of the individuals sitting on this panel? Are they open to embracing partnerships or hearing ideas to expand their reach? By the way, I have one such idea involving music, which I know is a passion of Helga. And the second question, which I do believe is related, comes from Coulibaly Adama, the executive director of Democracy Without Borders Foundation based in Mali. And he's also former chief of staff of the Minister of Communication of Burkina Faso. He asks simply, is it possible to organize a world march in each country to denounce this dirty Ukraine-Russia war? Helga?
We are having here today is actually, I think, the fourth in a row. It started in October. Then we had two in October, one in November, one in December, and it was basically the idea that it started with these Latin American parliamentarians, Congresswoman Huerta and some others, and out of this discussion, where Latin American politicians expressed that they are as much worried about the danger of World War III as people in Europe. And, if you think about what Nehru and Sukarno said at the first Bandung conference, They said if it comes to nuclear war, the people in the global south should not think that they are secure, because they may be less affected, but they will be as much dead as everybody else. And so people expressed the anxiety, what do we do as developing countries to help to, diffuse this conflict? So out of this came the idea of creating a movement of world citizens. Because first of all, the Schiller Institute, as you know, is called, according to the German poet Friedrich Schiller, who, among other many beautiful things, said that there is no contradiction between being a patriot of your own country and being a world citizen, and that, you never must adopt an issue as patriot which is in contradiction to the interest of humanity as a whole. And since the danger of World War III makes everybody immediately a world citizen, because it gives every person the right to stand up and demand that this is changed, because it will ruin his life, her life, all of humanity's life. So we have decided that we would attempt to create a movement of world citizens, of people who unite to bring humanity to a new paradigm, basically where geopolitics is overcome for good, and where everybody puts the one humanity first. So, I think that, we have been trying to, reach out. And I think the fact that we have such a good representation also from Africa, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, this is a reflection of that effort. And I would just invite all of you who are now in the discussion, but also those who are listening either now or later, to just join in, because this idea that we definitely need a world movement of citizens, which, just imagine if you, starting with this demonstration in Washington on the 19th, which was discussed in the previous panel, there will be parallel demonstrations in other American cities. And then we are trying to organize many demonstrations in Europe 1 week later. The reason being that Europe has a carnival on that weekend, and you cannot talk to some people, and you cannot have demonstrations when you have carnival processions going on at the same time. And also the 24th, 25th, 26th is the period where you have the 1-year anniversary of the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. So it is a very good moment to try to have as many peace demonstrations around the globe as possible. So if you could help to organize such demonstrations in Latin America, in Africa, in Asian countries, in whatever form is feasible and advisable, I think this would send a very powerful message already right there. But I think the idea is also, that we want to network among all forces of peace, all forces who agree that we need a new world economic order. This is a fight the Schiller Institute or the LaRouche movement has been involved in since the 70s. Our first book on the development of Africa, we published in 1978. The first big international conference we had in 76 about the continental-wide comprehensive development of the entire African continent. In 1975, my late husband went to Iraq to a celebration of the Ba'ath Party, and he came back from that with the idea to replace the IMF through an international development bank. Now, this was a very big project because we took that idea of an international development bank to the non-aligned movement and organized for it for 1 full year. And then at the annual conference of the non-aligned movement, which took place in 76 in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, they adopted a final resolution which was almost identical to the original outline of the International Development Bank. Now, at that time, there was a huge backlash because the financial powers to be decided to, crush this effort. They destabilized Indira Gandhi, Mrs. Bandaranaike. They killed in Ali Bhutto. And so this movement was set back. But what we have seen in the recent period, essentially because of the attempt to impose this unipolar world order when it no longer exists, there has been a real renaissance of the idea of non-alignment, which was expressed by the fact that many developing countries do not want to be pulled into this geopolitical conflict, and they have insisted on their independence. So this is why we have right now a unique chance, because right now this movement is much, much stronger than in the 70s, simply because China exists. China is by now the second largest economy in the world. In terms of buying power, it's already the first one. Because of the Belt and Road Initiative, there is already an alliance among 150 countries. The BRICS countries are growing. There are 17 countries who have applied for membership in the BRICS. So we have a unique situation where, different developments converge. And, the basic idea of the Schiller Institute, we have been thinking about ourselves and actually acted as a catalyzer of, as a think tank, as the idea, as the, initiators of ideas, mainly around a school of thought, which was created by my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, and which has spread, all over the world. And we have collaborators in many parts of the world. So, I could make a long speech about that, but basically, I want to invite you to help, because we are up against a tremendous problem, and we are trying to increase our media efficiency, social media, networking, but any help is welcomed, and just get in contact with us directly, and we will try to escalate this fight, up to the point where we become hegemonic with our ideas of a just new world economic order. And as I said earlier today, I think we are heading towards a real point of decision, where we need the alliance of all forces of the world to really unite and act together. And I think that then we have an absolute possibility to really enter a completely new era of humanity.
Okay, very good. And on this question of world protests or world marches or world activities against the danger of nuclear war, Dr. Membe, and could we have your input on that?
Yeah. Humanity has enough problems without wars. We don't need to compound the problems we already have with wars. Without peace in the world, there can be no development, especially for our poor countries. We can only develop when there's peace. We can only have a better world when there's peace. Every effort possible should be made to end unnecessary wars. Why have these endless wars when we are plagued with so many problems? We have problems with dealing with poverty. We have problems with dealing with growing inequality in the world. We have problems dealing with growing unemployment in the world. And to that, we want to create wars. We want to bring wars. For whose benefit? Can wars take any nation out of poverty? Can wars take the world out of poverty, out of inequality? Can they wipe out unemployment? Can they safeguard the planet on which we all live? Wars destroy everything. They destroy the planet. They destroy human beings. They destroy everything that we hope for. So every effort that is being made to end wars should deserve our support. Every mobilization that takes place against war deserves the support of all of us. The initiatives that are being taken towards peace deserve our support, and those initiatives need to be encouraged as much as possible as we can. But to end some of these wars, to end the Russian-Ukrainian war, the security of Russia needs to be dealt with. The security of Ukraine needs to be dealt with. Russia has got legitimate security concerns. Ukraine has got legitimate security concerns. Even Europe, we can say, has legitimate security concerns. The security concerns of all these nations, of all these countries, of all these peoples need to be addressed. We cannot be secure, or no country can be secure, if the security of the neighbors are not taken into account. It's not enough to be concerned about the security of Ukraine without being concerned about the security of Russia. It's not enough to be concerned about the security of Europe without being concerned of the security of Russia. In short, about the security of all peoples. So the initiatives that are being taken or being contemplated to mobilize against war deserve support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Elison Karuhanga, please.
Thank you very much. The war in Russia and Ukraine, the war between Russia and Ukraine, is of course a significant and terrible war. We are seeing a lot of people dying, and on whichever side of the bombs that are dropping those people are, soldiers are all civilians, Russians or Ukrainians. Of course, we have to understand the overall unity of the human brotherhood. As an American, I believe, once said that there is no document from human hands that makes those people suffering wherever they are suffering any less our brothers. But there's more than a humanitarian reason why the war in Ukraine needs to find a quick and lasting solution. We have seen, of course, right now energy prices are starting to stabilize. But shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, we saw an increase in oil prices around the world, and that increment hit the poorest people in the world the hardest. I guarantee you, the kings and the presidents, the ultra billionaires, and the rich people definitely did not suffer from this increase in price. It was working class people in the industrial world and peasant people in the non-industrial world that have felt the economic pinch of this war, on whom this war operated as a tax on their already meager resources. And so this war needs to end. But when we're talking about war, and in particular this war, and when we're talking about what's happened around the world, from the perspective of an African, we do recall not too long ago, the United Nations Security Council imposed a no-fly zone on Libya, an African country, in a manner that was greatly opposed by the African Union. And we saw from that imposition of a no-fly zone an actual invasion of Libya, the capturing of its leader and his killing. And it did not end there. On account of that, the collapse of the Libyan state, we saw the killing of an American ambassador in Tripoli, but more than that, we saw instability coming towards much of Northwest Africa, Mali, Niger, parts of northern Nigeria, the resurgence of the Islamist groups there, the Central African Republic, parts of Cameroon. We saw human beings having to leave their homes, and a migrant crisis in Europe on account of the people crossing. The suffering that was caused by this war. When we talk of accountability for the Russia-Ukraine war, what about accountability for the war that brought displacement in Cameroon and Mali and northern Nigeria because of a proliferation of arms and the collapse of a neighboring state? I think when we start to ask ourselves the difficult questions in this world, we must come to this point where we realize that in the world we must, as an American said, learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. And when we look at it also from the perspective of energy and from the perspective of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and wheat and food and grain, it is true that when the elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. And I think many of us who have been grass for too long are really tired of elephants fighting for reasons that are not very clear to us. So I think my message would be, we need peace, and we also need economic liberation of people so that we can be able to pull countries up and make sure that human beings in this day and age can live properly and decently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. I'm very glad to see that we have Marcelo Munoz back with us here. We are in the closing moments of this panel since it is quite late. However, here's how I think I would like to proceed. To have closing remarks, first from Marcelo Munoz, followed by Jacques, and then in conclusion by Helga. And Marcelo, perhaps
Lo tengo abierto. No sé, lo tengo abierto. ¿Verdad?
Hello?
One moment, Dennis will need to reconnect.
The floor is not coming out.
People know. Just let people know that we're reconnecting Dennis's audio. We have a bit of a technical problem, so be a standby. And otherwise, I will attempt to pontificate, filibuster, or other such things. Are you back?
I'm back. I believe I'm back. I was always here, but for some reason the audio connection failed. Okay. I can now be heard, Dave. You good here?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry about that once again. So I was going to ask Marcelo Munoz in the closing part here of his comment on the session in general, but in particular the point he was making at the end in defense of philosophy and the philosophical basis of a joint world development project and approach between China and the Western world. So Marcelo, your comments, please.
Sí, ¿se me oye?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Vamos a ver. A lo largo de toda la jornada, hemos hecho
all through this meeting, we have made some hundreds of calls for peace and for a new global order. What happens in a world when so many citizens call for this and nothing happens? I believe we have a central problem in the world today. World peace cannot be attained, a new world order cannot be achieved in depth unless there is a principled agreement among the main powers: China, United States, and European Union. These three powers are not working together in the slightest for either peace or common. The United States does not want to rely on China. It merely wants to contain China. That is their global strategy, to contain China, to prevent its economic development, its economic growth, technological, scientific development, and its growing presence in the world. They are not happy at all, for instance, with China's presence in the world as it expresses itself in the New Silk Route. They opposed the project. In order for the European Union to join this New Silk Route, many European countries, aside from Greece, Italy, Portugal, have joined these projects. Other countries, too, would like to join this, but the United States, NATO, is preventing that. There is an agreement between China and the European Union for bilateral investments benefiting both sides, but it has bogged down in the European Union and it is not ratified because the United States opposes that. And this it has made it impossible to ratify this agreement by pressure on the European members of the Union. The United States does not dare accept China as an important participant in global governance and stopping war. In this respect, China contributes to this international harmony for peace, a very powerful philosophy, the Confucian view of the philosophy of dialogue, of harmony among opposites, of unity among within diversity. This is a philosophy of convergence of contradictions that reaches all the way up to Hegel. Why can we not adopt this philosophical value, harmony, so that the United States relents in its hegemonism and join with countries like China, though Europe already has seen this. I believe that if this global power of the great powers, together with other powers that may join it, if this great power were built among these three great powers in the world, the war in Ukraine would not be happening right now. That is how I feel about it.
Thank you very much, Marcelo Munoz. We now have really about 5 minutes to close out this part of the panel before turning to the music. I would like to ask Julio Devido if he has any brief final comments, and then go to Jacques and to Helga. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Decía que no tengo más que aportar.
I was saying I have nothing to add. I am very much in agreement with the statements of all the participants, and I think that Mr. Munoz's last statement, as well as Mrs. Zepp's comments, are most appropriate, and I will pass up my comments to save time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Jacques Cheminade, your closing thoughts?
Well, we are in the worst threat in human history. We are facing this worst threat, but it creates the conditions to win a new paradigm, provided we organize this movement of world citizens, which should reach a size unexpected even for us tonight. And I would add, let's listen to music, because great compositions are based on the harmony of interests, agreements and disagreements for the benefit of all, from my upper vision. And this inspires both good government and the best in ourselves.
Thank you very much. Helga, your final thoughts?
Well, I mean, for someone who has fought now almost half a century for a new world economic order, I feel naturally both extremely worried that, some idiots, some criminal idiots may blow it all up, because I think anybody who even contemplates the idea that a nuclear war is winnable, or that you could have a regional nuclear war, or as the NATO maneuver, Global Lightning, I think it's a US maneuver, has the idea of a protracted nuclear war over weeks. It's just a sign of complete madness. And I think, that is a real danger, and we should really be all out mobilizing to stop that. But I think, having the long fight in mind and having gone through many stages of it, I'm also really optimistic that we absolutely can win that. And, I think the idea of eradicating poverty within a few years, maybe 1 year, 2 years, depending on how many countries work together to do it, and then start to build a civilization which is making it possible for every child on this planet to have a fulfilled life, I think that's within our reach. And, to have a beautiful vision on the future of humanity, I think that will give us the power to sustain this battle.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Jacques Cheminade, to Elison Karuhanga, Dr. Fred Membe, to Marcelo Munoz, to Julio Devido, and of course to Helga LaRouche. And I now would like to turn the floor over to my colleague, Dennis Speed, who will introduce the final portion of this panel, which is the music portion. Dennis, are you there?
So we are at the conclusion of today's conference, The Age of Reason, or the Annihilation of Humanity. Now, throughout this conference, we've shown this photo of the Brunelleschi Dome of Florence. And we are going to use the photo and use the dome to answer a question. Why is it possible to achieve justice in an unjust world? What's the dome have to do with justice? Well, think of the word justice not as retribution, but as proportion. We speak of making things right, not of revenge. We speak of achieving balance, having a measured response to wrongs. And that's because the world, including the material world of our senses, which in fact does not exist as we perceive it, is actually governed by the physical arc of the moral universe. Now, each generation of mankind has to rediscover what the curvature of that moral universe is. And that was the universe of Brunelleschi's new principles of construction, which he used to complete the Dome of Florence. He appeared, if you have that first graphic, yes, to bend stone into a curve, treating it like a living thing. Now, the Brunelleschi dome is actually two domes, one inside of the other. You can only get to see that if you happen to go to the dome and walk inside of the staircase. And the two domes have air holes built into them, allowing the structure to breathe as a living thing. You can see that illustrated here. That's an actual intersection of the two domes, and you see these holes. Brunelleschi discovered new physical principles not only to solve a geometric or mathematical problem of construction, but to crown the Cathedral of Florence as physical proof of an outlook that was expressed by Nicholas of Cusa. Now, let me make clear that that dome had not been covered for 100 years because of the inability of anyone to complete the project because of its difficulty. But Brunelleschi succeeded. And it was in 1436 he completed the dome, and 3 years later, in 1439, Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa convened a conference called the Council of Florence, where he convened it on behalf of the church, but he was the lead organizer of that conference. Cusa was the author of a work called De Docta Ignorantia, or Of Learned Ignorance, and that's the founding document of Western science, of advanced Western science. When we talk today about the extraordinary population growth from the time of the Renaissance, that population growth so hated and detested by people like Prince Philip and differently Al Gore, it comes from the work of Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa. And this idea that Brunelleschi proved of breathing life into stones is sometimes talked about in theology and Catholic theology as transubstantiation. It's the way that mankind invents natural resources, which are not simply there in nature, but we have to change through ideas the function and therefore the nature of the being of the physical world. The harmonics that Brunelleschi used to build the dome didn't have a mathematical or geometric name until after they were invented. Later was referred to as the catenary. Much later, the great Johannes Kepler, in his Harmony of the Worlds, would show the literal cosmic implications of Brunelleschi's discoveries. But these discoveries were the product of centuries and millennia. The work had been pioneered, for example, by Egypt's Temple of Ammon, as Cheikh Anta Diop showed in his African Origins of Civilization. That work was then taught to the Greeks and then advanced by the Greeks, including Pythagoras, Plato, Eratosthenes, and many others. Later, in the Christian era, the work on universal harmony was first advanced in music by Saints Ambrose and Augustine, who designed and wrote songs against the various heresies of the time. And that's actually what the process, the practice, the tradition of the kind of church singing that Dona Nobis Pacem represents came from. The great builders of the cathedrals of France, the great cathedral builders like Abbé Suger and others, advanced this work. And so universal harmony has been understood to be the secret principle of the power of the universe. Now, we've often talked about, and Helga Sepp-LaRouche has spoken often about, the coincidence of opposites. And that's at work here. Because what the coincidence is you have an individual creative mind, like a Brunelleschi or others, Da Vinci, many others, that changes the universe through humanity, and you have a dynamic universe that changes us, the individual, through that same humanity. That's the classical principle. That's the idea of universal harmony. Now, this is the universal culture of all free people, and it appears around the world in very different guises, different clothes, but it's always the same body of knowledge. What we're going to do now is present a small portion of that. For time reasons, we can't go to every culture in the world, but we want to give an identification of what we mean. The first musical example we are going to have here is an African-American spiritual known as Hold On, and we have the words subtitled on the presentation. There was a performance of the Schiller Institute New York Chorus. It was conducted by Diane Sayre, who you saw earlier in the first panel, who is a candidate for United States Senate. And that's the kind of qualification we believe you have to be a candidate and to be in the United States Senate. The next selection is a well-known song to many, Die Gedanken sind frei. And it is performed by the trio of Jen Pearl, Malena Robinson, and Michelle Aaron. I'll simply read the first verse of this. Thoughts are free. Who can guess them? They fly by like nocturnal shadows. No person can know them. No hunter can shoot them. And so it will always be. Thoughts are free.
Die Gedanken sind frei, wer kann sie erraten? Sie fliehen vorbei, wie nächtliche Schatten. Kein Mensch kann sie wissen, kein Jäger erschießen, mit Pulver und Blei. Die Gedanken sind frei. Ich denke, was ich will und was mich
That was Die Gedanken sind frei, Thoughts Are Free. Our next selection is a Russian folk song, because we don't believe in prohibiting the idea of singing Russian songs because some people think that Russia shouldn't exist. And it is called Shine, Shine, My Star, Gori, Gori, Moya Zvezda. Sorry about the Russian, which was not my language. And it says in part, shine, shine, my star, shine, affable star. You are my only cherished one, another there will never be. If a clear night comes down upon the earth, many stars shine in the skies, but you alone, my gorgeous one, shine in pleasant beams to me. We now have a Chinese folk song called The Sycamore Tree, which is performed by Du Qingyan, the soprano, and Se Hyun, pianist. And the words to that are, a gust of autumn wind blows from afar, chasing away the familiar leaves. From then on, there is no more gentle green shade. I can't hear. The stillness in the woods, the tranquility. Oh, the sycamore tree of my childhood, the sycamore tree in my heart. A gust of autumn wind blows from afar. Hang the fruit full from the tree. Just wait until the time of planting comes. Everywhere, oh, everywhere, spirit of life, spirit of life. Oh, the sycamore tree of my youth, the sycamore tree in my heart. Oh, the sycamore tree in my heart. We are going to hear Lift Every Voice and Sing, sometimes referred to as the African American National Anthem. Some think that this should be the American National Anthem. It's sung here again by the Schiller Institute Chorus. A final selection today will be on the music, but before I say something about that, let me point out that the conductor in that case was Roland Carter, who did the arrangement of that song. It's sung at many different functions all over America many times. This is a treatment by Roland Carter of a decidedly classical bent, and he was very happy to do that with the Schiller Institute. As we go to the final, and we open today actually with this performance by Robert McFerrin and Sylvia Olden Lee, and I referenced at the time only that Mr. McFerrin sang this at a time that he could not actually speak, but was able to sing. He's one of the great voices of the 20th century, and we were very happy to work with him for that brief period of time that we got to work with him in the early 90s. But in the case of a concert that happened in May of 1993, this concert is actually later, September, but I had a chance to have a conversation with George Shirley. George is also a very important singer, tenor, who had an extensive career at the Metropolitan Opera. Had a lot of problems over at the Met because as an African-American male playing romantic roles, he was often threatened. But George made a point to me at that time that I'd like to just say to you. He said to me that a song like this song of Schubert is no different than an African-American spiritual. And I was stunned by his saying that. He said, well, because the issue is what is the content of what is being said, and what is the content of what is being conveyed. That is what makes them identical, not the form. And just like to point out, also just for interest for people, that the Dona Nobis Pacem, which you heard at the beginning, and this piece, Andi Music, was pointed out by conductor John Segerson, have a very interesting connection. We're going to put something up on the screen just to show this. If you look at the first notes of the two pieces, Du Holde Kunst, one note is repeated, as you can see in the top staff, and then you look at the first three notes underneath the Dona, that the intervals are the same, but they are inverted. In the top piece, the interval goes up and then down. In the other, it goes down and then goes up, but the intervals are identical. It is a fourth up in the Andi Music, and then a sixth down. It is a fourth down and a sixth up in the Dona. Now, while that may seem to be merely a technical matter, the important thing is that this idea of the power of the musical science, which is called classical music, is something that is embedded actually in the nature of music. And what we just want to point out and hope to convey is that there are powers that justice has when justice studies the nature of the universe. Music is that study. And it's also something more. It's a celebration. It's a celebration of the creativity that people have all over the world, and they express in many different forms. And this time, as people will see, we have the subtitles for what is being said by Mr. McFerrin, who was sort of brought out of a condition of forced retirement by Sylvia Olden Lee, a great vocal coach and a great friend of the Schiller Institute. And the content of the song is what Mr. McFerrin is living as you see him doing it there. And so we thought it best to conclude with this today. We're going to conclude with a quote from Dr. King's Nobel Prize acceptance speech, December of 1964. I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of thermonuclear destruction. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. And of course, it was Dr. Martin Luther King who made famous the phrase, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Good evening, and thank you for participating in today's conference. And as Ray McGovern said, find out where you stand and then stand there.